this evening, I will create a link. We'll have our very own YouTube channel. I always think that's kind of cool to say that we have our just for us, a YouTube channel just for us. So I'll put today's recordings in it. And then tomorrow when we come together, I'll share that link with you guys so you can save it and you'll have access to it. If you want to go back and look at any of this information, you're welcome to do that. So that's where we're heading with that. I do want to share my screen. I was able to get that meth lab article from the commission that I was talking about. So I got that in our Learn Test Pass. Again, if you have not created and accessed that account yet, please do so. So if we look in Learn Test Pass, and you can do so after class, down here under the Campbell folder, and there's that article that I was talking about from the commission. This came out, 2005. But again, I know there's a lot of questions surrounding the possibility of getting a listing that was possibly a meth lab. So I think this is a decent article from the commission that kind of fills in those gaps a little bit. A couple other things in the Campbell folder that I do want to point out. The agency, agency and material facts are topics that we're seeing in this year's CE classes. So if you have to take continuing education in the 2022-2023 year, this is kind of a pre-site of what you're going to see. Of course, if you don't have to, then you won't. But I love what they did this year, both with agency and material facts. I didn't give you the whole CE class, but they gave us summary of important points. So they took agency and they turned it into bullet points. They took material facts and they turned it into bullet points. They took, I think from your CE, some of this is like 20, 30 pages. And they took it and they gave us 4 or 5 pages of bullet points. So I put this in here for you guys to use as a resource. If you want to download it, when you're looking at Learn Test Pass, you guys see this little icon right here, the little box and the arrow through it, that's your download. So anything I have in Learn Test Pass, you're welcome to kind of grab and use. Any questions about anything we talked about this morning? Anything so far? Michelle, can I get you to throw in your license number? I know it didn't keep for some reason. Thank you. Yep, Maria, you're the newest. So you win. Y'all want to make me feel old? Maybe I can't even do it. There's my license number, 264. I'm getting to the point where you guys are about 100,000 away from me. And that's going to make me feel really, really old. The first day I log into post licensing and I see somebody with a number of 364, that's the one that's going to do it. But we're heading there. Maria's got me closer and closer. 339. I think lanes start with a 1. You know, I tell you guys, every once in a while you bump into somebody with a 5-digit license number, not a 6-digit, a 5-digit. That is straight up respect right there. They've been in it for a long, long, long time. So if you ever come across somebody with a 5-digit, tip your hat to them. They deserve that. All right. So we left talking about the duties that we as agents owe our clients, the duties as we as agents owe our customers. When we're dealing with, there's distinctions between clients and customers. We said the clients got old car, they got first class service. Customers get coach, they get honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. License law and commission rule gives us duties that we owe to everybody, regardless if you're a client or a customer. So regardless of our relationship, and there's various things. And what I would like to do for those of you with the digital, if you will, please turn to page 164. I'm sorry, if you're in the hard book, page 164. For my digital users, you're looking for the section called Agent's Duty under Real Estate License Law. So my hard copy, we're on page 164. My digital people, we're looking for Agent's Duty under Real Estate License Law. And what we're going to look at, and actually, let me do this. If I can do this really quick. Let's see. Let's look at it together. That way we know we can all see it. So we're going to talk about these things that I owe the consumer. Maybe your client, maybe you're my customer. And it gives us a nice little bullet point. So here we are. Gives us a nice little bullet point. No matter who you are, we have a duty to avoid. Can you guys see that okay? Is that okay? We have a duty to avoid making any willful or negligent misrepresentation or omission of a material fact. We're going to talk about omission and misrepresentation next. So hang on to that first bullet point. We're going to get more in depth in that one. We also have a duty to avoid making false promises, anything that's likely to influence or persuade a party to make a decision in a transaction. Again, you guys, we can't have any unfulfilled promises out there. If you tell somebody you're going to do it, especially one that is relevant to the transaction at hand. We have a duty to avoid undisclosed conflict of interest. I think the biggest undisclosed conflict of interest we have is undisclosed dual agency. We have a duty to make sure that we are properly creating dual agency with our clients. Duty to properly account for funds held in trust for others. I owe my client accounting. That's the A in old car. But even if you're not my client, if you're just my customer, if I'm holding your money in my trust account, I still have a duty to safeguard it, right? I always have a duty to protect somebody else's money when it's in my possession. We have a duty to act competently when we're performing services to our buyers and sellers, owners, tenants. We have a duty to avoid improper conduct. We have to be honest when we're dealing with all parties. I don't think this generally just is for clients and customers. I think when we're dealing with anybody in the transaction, this is covered. Is it the lender? Is it the home inspector? We have a duty to treat everybody honestly in the transaction. We have a duty to deliver all offers and contracts to a party to the transaction. You may remember that we have a duty, first off, to deliver all offers to our sellers, no matter what they are. We have a duty to deliver that. But we also have a duty to get it to them as soon as possible. Particularly the commission rule says we have to deliver offers to our sellers immediately, but in no event later than how many days? Immediately, but in no event later than, and I'm seeing 3 days. 3 days is the max. Explain to me why it's taking you 3 days to get an offer to your seller. I'm just saying, right? So be in communication, get that delivered. And then we have a duty to disclose to any parties commission, referral fees, kickbacks, etc. The general rule of thumb with this last bullet point, if we're gonna make more than the agreed upon commission in our agency agreement, we've got to disclose that to our client. So let's say, for example, the builder offers a $500 bonus. So in addition to the commission that my buyer and I agreed to in our agency agreement, in addition to that, I'm going to get $500 from the builder when I bring them this ready, willing, and able buyer, when we get this buyer to closing. I got to share that with my buyer. My buyer needs to know that. And guys, by the buy at the closing table isn't sufficient. We need to share this information with them when they're trying to make a decision if they want to enter into a contract with this builder. In other words, they need all that information up front. So if we're going to make more than what we agreed on in our agency agreement, we need to share that. So let's go. So under license law and commission rule, we're working with principals and clients, or customers, I should say, clients or customers. We have these duties that we just looked at, regardless of our relationship. And what we're going to do now is talk a little bit more. We're going to break down misrepresentation and omission. We're going to make sure that we understand those. So before we talk about the prohibited acts, let's first just kind of back up just a few steps and have a conversation about what the words that we're getting ready to encounter mean. So a misrepresentation is a lie. I don't know another better way to put that. If you misrepresent a material fact, you have lied about it. Somehow you communicated false information. Maybe you verbally spoke it. Maybe you put it in your advertising. Maybe you texted it. Maybe you emailed it. Maybe you shared it with somebody else. Doesn't matter how. Somehow you got false information out there. That is a misrepresentation. An omission means you didn't disclose it. You kept your mouth shut. You didn't disclose. Do I have to disclose material facts? Yeah, no matter who I'm talking to, right? So I always have a duty to disclose these material facts. So if I willingly or negligently even keep my mouth shut, I've omitted the material fact. The other two words that we're getting ready to see, again, we're doing a little mashup in just a second. The other two words that we're getting ready to see are willful and negligent. A willful action is one that is done on purpose. A willful action is one that is done intentionally. A negligent action is one that is done accidentally. Do we make mistakes? Do you guys ever make a mistake? I could tally up just today, right? So we're humans. We all make mistakes. Guess what? Our commissioners are human as well. They make mistakes. If and when you find out you made a mistake, you got to get it corrected as soon as you can. So if you find an error in your listing, for example, once it's gone out, get it corrected. If you have any seriously interested buyers, I would reach out to them or their agent and let them know, whoopsie, I found a mistake. So a willful act is one that is done on purpose. A negligent act is one that is done accidentally. Guys, even though it's negligent, even though you didn't mean to, it still happened. And that's what we want to try to avoid. It's another reason why it's not a bad idea to put an extra set of eyes on your listing before you hit submit, so we can maybe try to avoid these mistakes. So before we do our mashup, we talked about this word puffing right before break. Puffing is not a misrepresentation as long as you're not putting false information out there. Usually with puffing, we think about me expressing my opinion, maybe exaggerating a little bit. Just be very careful that your opinion, your puffing, doesn't cross over that fine line into misrepresentation. We like to use a lot of adjectives when we put a listing in. It was sometime last year, it's very recent, but as of within the last year or so, try at MLS, we now get, is it 1,000 characters for our public remarks? That's a lot of words I can put in there. There's a lot of adjectives and fancy descriptive words I can use. And that's fine as long as it's not crossing that fine line to misrepresentation. So we talked about misrepresentation, we talked about omission, we talked about willful, and we talked about negligent. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take those 4 words and we're going to do like a mashup. And we're going to do a mashup of the prohibited acts of material facts. So if you mishandle a material fact, what are the actions, the prohibited acts that you've done? And the first category we have is a willful misrepresentation. Willful misrepresentation. The licensee has actual knowledge about the material fact and they lie. You know, and you lie. It's a willful act, which means it's done intentionally. and you open your mouth and a lie falls out. A negligent misrepresentation is still a misrepresentation. It's still a lie, but it's unintentional. You didn't mean to. It doesn't change the fact that it still happened. Everybody with me? What do you guys think? And you can share in a chat or unmute, whatever. Between willful acts and negligent acts, which one is probably more harshly punished down at the Real Estate Commission? Willful or negligent?
Willful.
Willful. I would agree, because that was done on purpose. So willful. Now, I'm not saying you can't get in trouble for negligent. Let me be very clear. I'm not the commission, right? I can't make that decision. But I think the willful acts are going to be the ones that are going to get you, because you did it on purpose versus a negligent that was unintentional. Should you ever get yourself in trouble with a negligent act, one thing that the Real Estate Commission is going to apply when determining if you face disciplinary action for your negligence, the Real Estate Commission is going to apply what's referred to as the reasonable standards test. And the Real Estate Commission is going to ask, would a reasonably pertinent broker known or should have known that information? Could you have asked questions? Could you have found out? And depending on what they decide from their reasonable standards test, depends on the disciplinary action. So they're going to rely on what we should know or should have been able to find out. And one thing the commission cautions us on that I see on a regular basis, we cannot use a disclaimer as a defense. We cannot put something in MLS that says like agent not responsible for verifying zoning, right? I'm not going to be able to put something in there, a disclaimer to protect myself. I have a duty to disclose material facts. If there's a potential zoning, rezoning change proposal on the table, I have a duty to disclose that. I can't pass it off onto somebody else by a disclaimer. Does that make sense? I see this a lot. And I don't know why it's there, other than the fact they didn't take my post license. No, I'm kidding. But seriously, we can't use these disclaimers as a defense. I tell y'all, probably one of the biggest ones I see is a link to the working with real estate agent disclosure in the email signature. Now, I'm not saying you can't have that link in your email signature, but I'm saying you can't use that as your sole means for delivering working with real estate agent. You can't come back and say, well, it's not my fault they didn't click on the link. That would be an example if you're using it for that purpose. If you're using it to make it convenient, you're still explaining it, you're doing your job. We are going to talk about that working with real estate agent disclosure soon. So we'll revisit that and see that in just a minute. When it comes to negligent acts, listing agents have certain standards. They're the ones for the accuracy of the information in MLS. Like we said, if you're the listing agent, regardless if you're the one putting the listing in or not, you're responsible for the information. So you need to make sure that what you put in is accurate. Check it and double check it. And if you find a mistake once you put it in, just fix it. I'll share with you guys, I had a listing once. And it was when I met these sellers that I learned that there are two types of people in the world. People that use their garage to park their car in, and people that use their garage for storage. These sellers had a garage full of storage. They had aisles. It was like walking through a storage room or something. I assumed there was a garage door opener because, you know, it had a garage door and it had an opener. So I just assumed. So I advertised that in MLS. Did you hear me say I assumed? Did you guys just have a little red flag go up when I said that word? Be very careful. So I had a showing and I got a call from the agent after the showing. I'd never met this woman. I've never had a conversation with her before. I've never had a conversation with her since. She called me and said, Julie, thank you for letting us see your listing today. I said, you're welcome. What did you guys think? And she said, it doesn't work for them. And I said, appreciate you sharing. Good luck to you guys. And she said, I did want to tell you. She said, your MLS says that there's a garage door opener. You know, the little contraction on the ceiling of the garage that like lifts the door and the chain, and you hit the button and it lifts the door. You advertise that. She said, but there's not one in that garage. I said, oh my goodness. And I called the seller and I said, are you? And she's like, no, we've never had. She said, we bought it as a foreclosure and they had gutted it and taken it out. And we never put one in. Since the day we bought that thing, it's always been a hand crank. You got to get out there and lift it physically. Was I appreciative of that agent calling me and letting me know that? Absolutely. I made my note in MLS. Guys, I don't know how much those things cost, but I'm pretty sure if I'm buying one, I want to buy it for myself and not for, you know, the person that bought that home with me advertising that there was one in there. Do I have everybody? So we need to make sure. We made a mistake. I went back and fixed it. And I knew that, you know, and I made a note because I documented everything. But as soon as I learned of that error, y'all know what's one of the first thing I look for now when I walk into a garage? Yeah, I look up to see if there's actual an opener. We live and we learn, don't we? So use my mistake to help you guys really pay attention to what's in the home and not assume that because there's a garage door opener. Standards for selling agents. Usually when you're working with a buyer, you can rely on the information that's in MLS, unless you have a little red flag going up telling you something doesn't look right. Like that agent, garage door opener, I don't see one. You know, she used her little red flag and to help me out as the listing agent. Again, we could rely on MLS unless you or your buyer say, are you sure? That's when our little red flag goes up, and it should prompt us to investigate further, find out actually if it's there, if it's accurate, if it's correct, whatever. So misrepresentation. And then we have our omissions. Willful omission. The broker has actual knowledge of a material fact and you don't disclose. Have you guys ever heard of the rule, don't ask, don't tell? Don't ask, don't tell. Yes, this does not apply here. We don't have to wait for them to ask. If we know of a material fact, we have to disclose it. So just because they come into your open house and they don't ask you, is there termite damage? If you know there's termite damage and you know that they're interested, we have to disclose them. We're not going to have to wait for them to ask. And that's what we're doing with willful omission. We're treating it as a don't ask, don't tell. And that doesn't work here because we always have a duty to disclose material facts. And then the last of the prohibited acts, the big four, I like to call them. Again, this is how we mishandle material facts, is negligent omission. You omitted it. Maybe you didn't know. Maybe you received you received no knowledge, you didn't know. Again, with negligent acts, the commission is going to apply the reasonable standards test. And especially with a negligent omission, they're going to ask, did you ask questions? Did you have reason to ask questions and dig a little deeper? With negligent omission, just because you act in good faith is not a defense. Disclaimers are not a defense, and acting in good faith are not a defense. We always have a duty to disclose material facts. I think as you guys are taking all this in, if I were you guys, I would focus more on the misrepresentation and omission side of it. So the commission first is going to find out, did they lie about it or did they admit it? Is it a misrepresentation or an omission? As they dig further, as they dig deeper, they will learn if you did it willfully or negligently. But it all starts with, did the agent lie about the material fact or did the agent omit the material fact? Questions on the big four. And there's some good, if you guys are flipping through your book or looking in your digital, when we start talking about misrepresentation throughout your book, there's some good examples. So I just like to point the examples out to you guys. I think those kind of help. So as you're looking through the material this week, you may just want to look at those examples, help give you some examples, scenarios, and how they may apply. Also, to help keep everybody honest, we have something called the Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act, or the Unfair and Deceptive Practices Act. This is an act that includes us. We have to follow this act. Most homeowners have to follow this act as well. Who might be exempt from this act is, for example, the for sale by owner that doesn't do this on a regular basis. Now, if you have an investor that sells 15 properties a year on their own, now they're subject to the act as well. So you and I are subject to this, most homeowners. And if we're found guilty of this act, it could invalidate the sales contract. The judge could rescind it, which means the seller would get the property back. I'm sure there's some fines and penalties and all sorts of other things involved as well. But it could invalidate the sales contract. And acts under this act, acts under the act, include giving a misleading opinion or a false statement. You're being deceptive. That's what this act is trying to prevent you from being unfair or deceptive. Failing to disclose a material fact would fall under this act. Misleading advertising, misrepresenting the property or the material fact would fall under this act. This is one that's handled in the court. The commission could discipline your license for mishandling material facts, but the courts would get involved. If they find you in violation of this act, the party that you injured could be entitled to 3 times the amount of damages. So the judge is going to say, this is the amount of damages, times it by 3. There's your fine, there's your penalty. So help to keep us honest, help to keep homeowners honest, most homeowners. So let's talk about our sellers. Sellers get to fall under something called the doctrine of caveat emptor. Who wants to, does anybody remember what caveat emptor means? Here's your Latin lesson for the day.
Let the buyer beware.
Let the buyer beware.
Buyer beware. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state, which means the onus to learn about the property is on the buyer. The seller doesn't have to disclose much, do they? The seller doesn't have to fix anything. What does the seller have to do? Put a sign in the yard and sell their house. North Carolina favors sellers. Let's just get that out there. North Carolina favors sellers. So buyer beware says they don't have to disclose. Buyer beware says the onus is on the buyer to learn about the property. And guys, guess what? When the buyer hires us, we take on that responsibility with them. That's why they're hiring us, to help give them the tools and the resources that they need. So caveat emptor says the burden of discovery is on the buyer. That's why they're encouraged to investigate the property. That's why they have a due diligence period. So they have this open time, if you will, to discover and learn and investigate the property as much as they possibly can. The seller doesn't have to disclose. That doesn't give them a free ticket to lie. When we get into this next section and we start working with sellers, we're going to look at our residential property owner's disclosure statement, affectionately known as the RPODs. We're going to look at the seller disclosure. It's a mandatory form with optional disclosure, which means the seller's got to complete it, but they have the right to say no representation. Why? Caveat emptor. Good question comes in. If we encourage the buyer to get inspection, they do not, are we responsible? My answer to you is, are you going to document your attempts to get the buyer to get a home inspection? Are you going to have that documentation? You're going to shake your head yes. Why? Because we document everything. So am I going to encourage my buyer? Yes. But guys, I can't make them do anything, can I? So if the buyer refuses a home inspection, the best I can do is document that conversation. And I actually have a form. It's not the syllabus for this class, but I still think it's a good form. So we'll look at that. I'll pull that up on break. We'll go off syllabus for a second. Woo, look at us being a bunch of rebels. We'll go off syllabus and look at the form that we can use to kind of protect ourselves in the event that the buyer doesn't want, as you said, the home inspection, for example. Again, the burden of discovery is on the buyer. This is regardless of how the seller completes their seller disclosure. Even if the seller goes through and says, no, 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 there's not a single problem with this house. Should the buyer rely on that? Should they say, okay, this is a perfect house without any issues whatsoever? I'm here to tell you guys something. Y'all ready? Brace yourselves. There is no such thing as a perfect home. Every single home has problems. If the seller's saying no to everything, what they're saying is nothing that they know of. Could there be something latent? Could there be something they hadn't discovered yet? Regardless of how the seller completes their disclosures, the buyer should always be encouraged to do their inspections and learn as much about the property as they possibly can. Again, that contract to closing process and the buyer's responsibility and things that they should be encouraged to investigate and inspect, that's all covered in 302. So if you haven't gotten to 302 yet, that's something else you know you have to look forward to. Seller's agent, and the seller says, no, are we responsible to find out? Yes. The seller can hide under caveat emptor. I have to follow license law and commission law. I don't get to hide under caveat emptor. So regardless of how the seller completes their disclosures, I always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. So when the seller says the roof leaks, I'm going to say no, or I'm going to say no representation. Shh, don't tell anybody. That's not a lawful instruction for my seller that I can follow. Let's go ahead and agree. Let's just throw this out there. Probably one of the biggest conflicts between sellers and listing agents is when you get to the point where I say, I got to disclose the fact that your roof leaks. And the seller says, that's not fair. I thought you represented me. Why won't you keep your mouth shut? Because the seller doesn't hold and regulate my license. Who regulates my license? The real estate commission. The commission says, we always have a duty to disclose material facts. Do we have to do our own inspection as a seller? Some sellers, and I think we're going to see this as the market adjusts, some sellers are starting to do a pre-listing inspection. So it's not like a full-blown home inspection. It's less time and less money, but the home inspector can blow through real quick and see if anything, glaring, any major problems that stand out. Maybe the seller wants to address it before we list. Maybe it's just kind of prepare them for what that repair request is going to look like. But some sellers, and I think we're going to see it more as this market shifts when we get out of the seller's market that we're in. Another question comes in, do we put what's wrong on the MLS? So the commission rule says we have to disclose it, but it doesn't necessarily specify how we get that information out there. So could we put it in MLS? Yep. When you call to schedule the appointment, could I call you and say, hey, just by the by, could I text you to email you, right? So it doesn't matter how we get it out. Here in the Triad MLS, I can't speak for other MLSs across the state, but I know Triad MLS, we have public remarks which is what we put in the MLS that are going to go to all the websites for the public to see. So Zillow, Realtor.com, your firm's website, all that, it all starts with MLS. But we also have a space for agent-only remarks. So if there's something I want to disclose and put in my advertisement, but I don't want the public to see, then I can put that in agent-only, allow the other agents to see so they can share with their client. And then before you bring me an offer, yeah, did you see that? Did you make sure you saw that? You with me? So there's no rule that says how we get it out there. We just got to get this information out there. Good questions. Thank you. Even though the seller doesn't have to disclose, as we said, this doesn't give them a free ticket to lie. Nobody's ever allowed to lie, unfortunately. So the seller could be held liable if they're found that they lied, they engaged in fraud. By the way, the difference between misrepresentation and fraud is intent. So when the judge is trying to determine, both are a lie, but when the judge is trying to determine if you misrepresented something or if it was fraud, they're going to look for intent. So fraud was done intentionally. You lied and you knew it. The seller, I should say, lied and they knew it. They could be held liable for that. The seller shouldn't encourage the buyers to forego an inspection. Man, how many of you have been involved in the market in the last year or two? Anybody that old? Not your physical age, but your real estate experience age. So did we see a lot of, well, what I saw was a lot of buyers waiving their right to have a home inspection because it was a highly competitive market. Hello, 45 offers after one weekend. And one advantage that buyers thought they had was by telling the seller, I'll buy your house, but I'm not going to have a home inspection. I don't know who generated that conversation. Caveat emptor says it shouldn't have come from the seller. I'd like to think that it didn't come from the agent. I could never imagine looking at my buyer client saying, you'd get an advantage if you waive the inspection. I mean, just thinking about saying that makes my heart flutter a little bit. I hope that that came from the buyer. And I hope that that came from the buyer after the agent said, are you sure? You sure you want to waive that home inspection? But guys, buyers were desperate and they were trying to figure anything to get their offer accepted, get their foot in that door. What I'm telling you guys is that inducement to forego the inspection could not have come from the seller. Hopefully that was on their own accord and against the wishes of their agents. That's what I like to tell myself, what I like to believe before I go to bed at night. And the other thing the seller could be held liable for is if they don't provide the Residential Property Owners Association disclosure statement, also known as the RPODs, or the Mineral and Oil and Gas Right disclosure, also known as the MOG. We will talk about the act that surrounds these forms. We will look at these forms when we get into our next section of working with sellers. So we will see these again and spend a little bit more time on those then. Questions on caveat emptor. Caveat emptor is for the seller, not for us. We get licensed law and commission rule. Did they tell you guys, anybody in your pre-licensing class tell you guys that once you got your license, you're going to be held to a higher standard? Here we are. All homes in North Carolina are sold as is. There's a sentence in our offer to purchase and contract that actually says this property is being sold in its current condition. And that just kind of a legalese way of saying as is. The seller's not required to do any repairs. If they're going to do anything, any repair, then we've amended the contract. We've amended that one sentence. And now what we're saying is the property is being sold in its current condition, with the exception of the seller fixing the electrical and the plumbing and the roof and whatever else repairs we get them agree to do. Again, in the last couple of years, we've not been seeing repairs much. We haven't had to negotiate repairs as much. That's going to come back. even if a property is advertised as is, if you guys ever see something actually listed, actually says as is, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? I'll tell you what it tells me, but I would like to know what it tells you. But
something is hidden or something is wrong.
Something's wrong. So what was that, Maria?
Needs.
Oh, you muted again.
Oh, sorry. Needs major work.
Maybe it needs major work. So you guys feel when you say as is, the seller's saying, hey, there's problems. As is, good luck. Maybe there is. Maybe they're telling you that there's major repairs, major work. I tend to think of as is as the seller telling us up front they're not going to do any repairs. Can I still ask? Yeah, there's no law that says I can't ask. For me, and that's just me. And when my buyer says, I know this says as is, but gosh, this roof is like 30 years old. Can we ask? Absolutely. And as a buyer's agent, aren't I going to do what my buyer requests? So even though it says as is, now, if you walk in there and you start seeing, roof and foundation, and you start seeing what the picture, if the house looks like the picture on my screen, you may want to advise your buyer to look at other property. I'm just saying that thing looks like the next good gust of wind is going to take it down, right? So I'm not quite sure how much the seller is going to get from it. Just when you see, and guys, I'll be honest, some agents put as is in there because they don't know that the property is being sold in its current condition. We're not all as knowledgeable as others. So just make sure when you see that you have this conversation with your buyer. Maybe it's a red flag. You're going to run into a bunch of problems. Maybe it's the seller saying they're not going to do any repairs. Maybe they're just acknowledging this up front. Foreclosures, I agree. I see as is a lot on foreclosures. Estates, I see it a lot on estates. The heirs just don't want to deal with it. So various reasons, I wouldn't throw your guard up, but I would absolutely proceed with caution. Always proceed with caution. That's just good advice, isn't it? So what happens? What happens if we violate our agency duties? We spend a whole lot of time talking about what our agency duties are. What happens if we violate them? Well, here's a whole list of things. First off, we've already talked about disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission. If there's a complaint filed against you down at the commission, take a few big deep breaths. You're not in trouble yet. If there's a complaint filed, the commission will, and these days they're emailing it, send you what's known as a letter of inquiry. A letter of inquiry says there's been a complaint filed against you. This is the case. And then you have the opportunity to respond. They're still investigating, and they can't fully investigate the case without hearing from you. Does this make sense? So you get this email, this letter of inquiry, you have 14 days to respond. Once again, you're not going to be able to call them and say, I didn't do it. How you respond to this letter of inquiry is with your documentation, your forms, your contracts, your agency agreements, your text communications, your email communications. When I say document everything, I'm not saying, well, anything except this. No. Document everything. Guys, you never know who could file that complaint. They could be as sweet as pie to you and to your face. And as soon as they get home, go home and file a complaint against you. So you never know if and when it's going to happen. And the only way you have to protect yourself is with your documentation. So what do we document? Everything. I told y'all you're going to be tired of me by the time we're done next Sunday, but I hope you hear what I'm saying. If once you respond, the commission finds out that you were in violation of license, law, and commission rule, if that's the determination, then you will face disciplinary action. Maybe they suspend your license, maybe they revoke your license, maybe they just slap you on the wrist and tell you to take an extra CE class and don't do it again. Every single disciplinary action is handled on a case-by-case basis, a case-by-case scenario. The injured party could sue you. They could hire an attorney to sue you. So there could be a civil action brought in a court case. There could be a criminal prosecution, just depends on what you do. Remember, the court can fine you. The commission cannot. The commission just regulates your license. The court could also define that you don't deserve your commission. You violated something. So how do we prevent any of this happening? We're familiar with the license law and commission rule. We follow the rules. Our agency agreements are a two-way street. What I mean by that, the firm owes duties to the client, but guess what? The client also owes duties to the firm. So we've already decided I owe my client OCAR, right? I owe them obedience and loyalty and disclosure and confidentiality accounting and reasonable skill, care, and diligence. But there's duties that my principal owes me. And basically, my principal owes me the duty of acting in good faith. They've hired me to do a job. The seller has hired me to help them market, advertise, and sell their home. The buyer has hired me to help them select and purchase a property. They can't hinder my efforts. That's not acting in good faith. Let's say you take on a listing and the seller declines every single showing request that comes through. It's kind of hard for me to sell your house if I can't get a buyer in the front door. Yeah, there could be challenges here. We got to have them accept showings. They have to allow showings. Now, what if the household comes down with COVID? Can we stop showings for a couple of days while everybody gets better? Well, yeah, nobody wants to go in that house anyway, right? So we can make exceptions, but I'm talking about never, ever accepting a showing. I've worked with several sellers that have, over the years, that have new babies, and that time might be between 1 and 3. So could the seller request no showings between 1 and 3? Absolutely. We got to be reasonable here, but they have to let everybody else come in before 1 and after 3. Everybody with me? They have to act in good faith. Same thing with the buyer. If the buyer hires you to help them buy a home and they never want to see anything, they get frustrated because they haven't found anything to buy. Well, if I can't get you in the front door, how am I going to sell you a home? So they have this duty to act in good faith. The big thing that they owe us is our money. They owe us that compensation. This is exactly why we have written agency agreements. Can I bind anybody to an oral agreement? Nope. So when your buyer says, yeah, I'll pay you, but I'm not going to sign this, what do we got when we go to court? Nothing. If we got to take that, or let me rephrase that. If your firm has to take that buyer to court for your commission, it is the agency agreement that they have, that leg that they have to stand on. Your principal and your client, principal or client, also have duties to the third party. They also have duties to the customer in the transaction, i.e. the buyer in this case. The seller will have those duties. No matter what, the seller can't lie. No matter what, no matter who they're talking to. So one thing they can't do, the one rule they have to follow, they cannot lie. So they could be liable if there was a lie. And if you shared the lie that your seller told you, your seller may be liable for your actions. Not unless you don't have a little red flag go up that says, is this right? If you rely on false information from the seller and you have no reason to believe otherwise, that principal, that seller may be liable for your actions as well. All right, questions? How are we doing? I hear you. We're almost through day 1, Julie. That's just clipping right along, right? All right, we're getting ready to talk about your agency disclosure. Y'all, this is one commission rule that I do think you need to be familiar with. I think you need to write this down. And when you're looking at commission rules, I think this is the one that you need to sit down and read. There is a commission rule, 58A.0104. I will show you before this class is over where you can access this rule from the commission's website. But this is the rule that specifically addresses our agency agreements and our agency disclosure. So we're going to talk about the disclosure now. We're getting into the agreements when we talk specifically about working with sellers and with working with buyers. So, agency disclosures. I'm working with real estate agent. Where are my active people again? People that have practiced? You can show me by hand, a few hands go up. And of you that are active, have you gotten to do your working with real estate agent disclosure yet? Have you gotten a chance to present it? Did it go super smooth the very first time you did it? Were you blown away with your performance and you thought you did a phenomenal job? You're a better agent than I was. First few times you do it, it's going to be bumpy. It's probably going to be awkward. You're going to feel kind of silly with it. But I'm telling you, over time, it takes practice. Think of it as like your elevator speech, right? Once you get it down pat, that thing will roll out pretty quickly and you'll be able to do it. But it does take practice. So why must we do our agency disclosure? What do you guys think? Why do we have to, other than the commission tells us to? Forget about the commission for a second.
To protect ourselves.
Protect ourselves. Yeah. Who else are we trying to protect here?
The consumer.
The consumer. And Hamid, thank you very much for saying consumer. Did y'all hear what he said? Did Hamid say client? No. Guys, this is not a client form. We're doing this when you're still a consumer. Maybe you'll be my client. Maybe you'll be my customer. I don't know. This is not by the time you're a client, you should be past this form. Everybody with me? So why does the commission say we have to do it? We're trying to make sure that the consumer understands, I don't owe you confidentiality until you decide to hire me. And guess what? If you never hire me, I never owe you confidentiality. You only get confidentiality if you hire me. And we have a duty to warn the consumer. You need to be very careful about what you share with me because I represent somebody in this transaction. For example, let's say I'm doing an open house and the buyer comes in the front door. I represent that seller. And that buyer needs to know that when you're telling me all this confidential information about yourself, you might as well be talking directly to the seller. I always think of the agency disclosure as we're Mirandaizing the consumer. Have we watched enough TV shows that we know what Miranda rights are? What's in part do they say? Anything you say can be held against you. So we're letting the consumer know, be very careful about what you tell me. We also have the opportunity to introduce to the consumer the agency options that my firm offers. So we're kind of providing them a menu. I'm not saying this is how we're going to work together. I'm saying these are the choices because this is what my firm offers. We'll look at the disclosure in just a second. We will see this in just a second so we can see that choice, those menu options. We as brokers have a duty to review our working with real estate agent disclosure with all sellers and buyers no later than first substantial contact. I'm going to talk more about this first substantial contact in just a second, so bear with me, please. Working with real estate agent disclosure applies to all sales transactions. When you're working with buyers and sellers, you're in a sales transaction. If you're working with owners as a property manager or tenants, you're in a lease transaction and the disclosure is not required. Sales transactions And yes, a commercial sales transaction is a sales transaction. If there's a purchase price, if there's an exchange of property, it's a sales transaction, and we have to do our working with real estate agent. So let's talk about this idea for substantial contact, and let's talk about what the commission rule says. Commission rule says that we need to provide our disclosure to the consumer no later than first substantial contact. Once we've hit first substantial contact, we've gone past that point. There's never a time that it's too early. There's no rule about how early we do our disclosure. The rule says what's the last possible moment in time we have, and that's when we've hit that first substantial contact. So let's break that down for a second. When I say the word substantial, what do you guys think of with substantial? Tell me what you think that word implies or means.
Important facts.
Important facts about what?
House
Themselves.
they may want to see,
About what?
a home that they want to see or they're interested in.
A home that they want to see or they're interested in. What were you going to say, Bill, Ahmed? I heard you guys.
Themselves.
Themselves, yeah.
I would say things like, in this case, price and motivation and terms. I mean, when you start talking about financing, or you start talking about how you love something and you're motivated and you really want to do this, then all of a sudden you've crossed it. You've crossed the line.
Absolutely. When we talk about first substantial contact, you walk into my open house and I say, hi, my name is Julie. And you say, hi, Julie, my name is Bill. Did I just learn anything about your buying power? Did I just learn anything about your ability to buy, about your motivation? What did I just learn? I just learned his name was Bill. What's that tell me about Bill? Absolutely nothing. Just because Bill walked into my open house does not mean we hit first substantial contact. Now, if Bill comes in and starts talking about why he has to buy, what he's looking for, like Bill said, with features, what's his price point, what's his motivation, now Bill has hit first substantial contact. I share this with you guys because, particularly in the open house example, not all consumers warrant that first substantial contact. We can talk about the property all day long. That's okay. That's what we advertise on Zillow and Realtor.com, right? We can talk about the features of the property, but what we need to be on alert is for when that conversation switches gears from the property to the person. Before we start asking a lot of questions, before the person starts volunteering a lot of information, we need to do our working with real estate agent disclosure. This gets tricky. And this is not a fine science. People are going to blurt stuff out and you're not even prepared. Anytime we're acting in the capacity of an agent, we need to be prepared for first substantial contact. Because you know what I've learned about people over my years? And you guys may have this experience, not even real estate. Have you ever had a random stranger walk up to you in the store and just start spilling all their beans and telling you their life story and everything? People talk, and it blows my mind what people will say, and they will just share and share and share. And this is why we need to be on alert, because there's not a scientific discovery about when first substantial contact happens. And that's why you and I need to be on alert, paying attention. Let's say you decide your firm encourages you to wear your name badge everywhere you go. Why do they want you to wear your name badge everywhere you go?
Attract customers.
Attract customers. They want people to come up to you and start talking about real estate, right? So let's say you're on your way home from work and you swing by Harris Teeter and you're in aisle 4 of Harris Teeter. Could somebody hit first substantial contact in aisle 4 in Harris Teeter? Could they? Oh, wow, you're in real estate. Well, my gosh, we were thinking about buying because we really need to move and we got to get the kids in a better school. And you're still standing there trying to decide what kind of cereal you want to buy, right? So if you're acting in the capacity of an agent, you got to be on alert. Now, at this point, you guys, I don't have working with real estate agent disclosures in my purse. So when we're standing in aisle 4, it's not like I'm going to be able to whip that thing out and say, here you go. I do want to caution them. Please, I appreciate what you're telling me. Stop talking. Let's do this right. Let's do this in the right order. And maybe we can try to, maybe they're just chit chatting. Maybe they're actually interested. I don't know yet. What I know is I, the agent, need to be on alert, and I can't be afraid to tell, please stop talking to me, because you need to understand my role. You need to understand where I stand. I had a listing a couple years ago, and I want to say I had it listed for like 135, something like that. And we got a call on the sign, and the call came to our office number. So one of my teammates answered the phone, the office phone, and she said, thank you for calling. How may I help you today? And the woman on the other end of the phone said, I'm calling about your listing on 123 Main Street. I'm pre-approved for 150, and I'm willing to pay, X amount. Did we just hit first substantial contact? Boom. We didn't even know her name, but we knew what she was pre-approved for, and she knew how much she was willing to pay. I get what she was doing. I get it. She was proving to us that she was a serious buyer, and she wasn't out here wasting our time. Totally get it. But what did she just do if she were to present an offer? What did she just do? I now have a duty to go back to my seller and say, I know this is what they're willing to pay. I know this is what they're pre-approved for.
Counter offer, higher price.
Yes, because what did my seller just hear? Well, I know what she offered, but I know what she's willing to pay. So guys, this is our job to protect the consumer from sharing. This is our job. And we always need to be on alert, because I'm telling you, people talk, it blows my mind. My husband calls me the traveling billboard. If you ever get behind me in a stop sign, you will know it's me. The back windshield of my car has my firm, my name, my phone number, my email address, and the fact that I'm a real estate professional. If I get out of my car at Walmart, do I need to be on alert for first substantial contact? Because somebody could see my car and be like, oh, you're in real estate. People love to talk about real estate. And we need to make sure that what they're sharing with us doesn't cross this line. And if it does, before then, ideally, before then, we need to, please stop talking. I owe you this. I'm doing this for your best interest, so you know where I stand in the transaction. So first substantial contact could be defined as that point in time when either the broker and or the consumer begins to speak or act as if an agency relationship exists. This is implied agency at its finest, but the moment we start acting like we're in an agency relationship, we've passed that first substantial contact. So the point in time when the broker or consumer acts as if a relationship exists. First substantial contact could also be that point in time when the consumer discloses to me their needs, desires, or wants about a property to be sold or purchased. About the time the buyer's telling me how much they're willing to pay, or the seller's telling me how low they're willing to go. What's their motivation? First substantial contact could also be that point in time when the consumer discloses any confidential information that could be used against them in negotiations. I think a general rule of thumb, and I think Ahmed said it earlier, if we can always remember PTM, price, term, and motive. Once that conversation switches gears and we start talking to the consumer or asking the consumer question, or the consumer starts volunteering their price, term, or motive, please stop talking. I'm not trying to be rude. I don't want to interrupt you, but you need to know what you're telling me. Isn't that fair? Isn't that just fair? Careful what you share with me. More importantly, I don't owe you confidentiality. I think that's the hardest part, is getting people to stop talking. I don't know what kind of household you were raised in, but I'll tell you, in my household, mama always told me that it's rude to interrupt people when they're talking. Anybody else have similar mama tell you the same thing? It's rude to interrupt people. I'm telling you, in this case, it's rude to not interrupt them. In this case, it's rude to let them keep talking. It's in their best, and y'all don't tell my mom I said this, but in this case, mama's wrong, isn't she? Y'all don't tell me. It's in their best interest. It's in their best interest that we interrupt them. It's in their best interest to say, whoa, 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 whoa. I appreciate you, what you're sharing with me, but you need to know, blah, 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 blah. Would everybody agree with that? So I interrupt you. I tell you my disclosure. I tell you I don't know you confidentiality. We go through the disclosure. We do everything that we're supposed to. And then the consumer says, anyway. So as I was saying, we really got to buy right away. And this is our price point, da, 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 da. Once I've done my job, once I disclosed, y'all get out your pad and your pen and take notes, because we've already told them what you share with me, I got to take to the seller. If they insist on keep talking, that's on them, as long as you've done your job. Once we've disclosed, like, are you kidding me? Did we not just have this conversation? Yeah, whatever. So anyway, da 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 da. All right, price point.
At that point, I wouldn't want to interrupt them. Just keep going.
Yeah, right. Yeah, bring me an offer. Let's see how that works out for you. You know. So with our agency disclosure, we need to provide the disclosure to the consumer no later than. That's the actual verbiage in our commission rule. No later than first substantial contact. Again, there's no rule on how early we do this. The rule is the latest point. What's the latest point? By the time we've hit first substantial contact. As I said, we're going to spell out our agency options. We're going to share with the consumer the types of agency that my firm offers. And at that point, we have to determine in what capacity we're going to work. How are we going to proceed in this transaction going forward? Don't I need to know where to put you on my plane? Don't I need to know if you're going to get first class or coach? So once we've discussed our agency options, we got to decide how we're going to proceed. Am I going to be your agent? You'll be my client? Or are you going to be my customer? If first substantial contact happens face-to-face, we're going to review the disclosure and provide it to them immediately. Now, if you're in aisle 4 of Harris Teeter, like I said, you may not have a copy with you right now, but we can still stop them from talking and saying, let me explain this to you. We can still discuss it with them. If you're doing an open house, I hope that you guys have these things laying around, because somebody could walk in the front door and start talking. I do carry these things in my trunk. I'm ready to go. So if I am in the parking lot of Harris Teeter and you come up and start talking to me, I have this right here. If we don't have it physically in our hand, or if first substantial contact doesn't happen face-to-face, commission rule says, I still have a duty to discuss it with you. Just because we're on the phone or we're on email doesn't negate my responsibility to discuss it with you. But if I cannot put that in your hand right now, I have a duty to deliver it to you no later than 3 days. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? Even though I can't hand it to any of you right now. Try as I might, I cannot hand it to you, can I? But I can still have the conversation, I can have the discussion, and I still have the duty to get it to you, to deliver it to you within 3 days. Let's see, I got a question comes in. When following up on leads, if a consumer asks for covenants and restrictions information that requires out to the listing agent, is this first substantial contact? Well, we're still talking about the property, but I think at that point, we're going to start getting awfully close, right? So the buyers indicated an interest in this subdivision, and they're asking about restrictions and covenants. If we haven't hit something particular yet, I think we're getting close. And I don't think it's a bad idea to go ahead and do it. So again, there's no rule that says how early we have to do it. The rule says the latest we have, and that's by first substantial contact. And if you're to the point of the conversation that you're talking about covenants and restrictions and subdivisions, you're probably getting awfully close to first substantial contact. Does that make sense? So before we continue, because now I got other questions like, can you afford this house in this subdivision that you're asking me about restrictions and covenants, right? So now we're getting into price. Now we're getting into whether or not they can purchase that property. When you're working with a prospective seller, generally first substantial contact happens either when the listing appointment is scheduled or at the listing appointment. Again, there's no science here. A seller could call you this afternoon and say, I want to list my property. Can we meet on Wednesday? And you say, yeah, sure. What's your name? And they say, my name is Bill, and I live at 123 Main Street. And you say, great, Bill, I'll see you Wednesday at 2. Did we just hit first substantial contact? Not really. I just learned Bill's name and I know his address. I haven't asked a lot of questions yet. Now, what if Bill says, I need you to list my property. I got to sell fast because I'm getting ready to relocate and da 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 da. Whoa, Bill, whoa, stop talking, right? So maybe it happens when we're scheduling an appointment. Maybe we're getting close. Maybe it happens when we're actually at the listing appointment. Again, you guys, this is where we need to be on alert. So Bill calls me to schedule a listing. As long as we're doing is talking about the property and what time we're meeting on Wednesday, we haven't hit first substantial contact yet. But when I show up to Bill's house Wednesday at 2, isn't there a good point, a good reasonable belief that at some point in the next hour, we're going to bump on first substantial contact? So why would I not? As soon as I walk in the home, before I start looking, before I start having conversations with Bill, why would that not be one of the first things that I do? Everybody with me? If you know it's coming, do it. The big thing at the listing appointment that the seller needs to understand is that I don't owe you confidentiality unless you decide to hire. I'm telling you guys, and some of you may have experience with this already, competitive listing appointments are a very real thing right now. What I mean by that is sellers are talking to 2, maybe even 3 or 4 firms before they decide who to hire. So if they're talking to 4, only one of us is going to get the job, right? Doesn't that seller need to know that the other 3 of us don't owe you that confidentiality? And that's what we need to make sure that they know. As we're going through this initial listing appointment, it is, thank you. As we're going through this initial listing appointment, they need to know that I don't owe you this duty if I don't hire you. So that's working with sellers. Thank you for the reminder of break time. I know I just get to going in first substantial contact and it's a good time. So we do need to take a break. So thank you. So let's take 10. We come back. I just keep talking. It's amazing, isn't it? All right. So 3:03. 10 minutes, please. Are we back? Are we coming back? So before we continue on, I do want to just take a quick pause. We mentioned that form earlier. So I want to make sure we all are aware of this form. I'd like you guys to use this form if you're not already. And the form that I'm referring to is called the Professional Services Disclosure and Election. Y'all, this is our form. If we want to protect ourselves, this is the form that we use. This form, you can see, is about the property. It's between the buyer or seller and the firm. So we can use this no matter who we're working with. And as you see, we'll go through here, and this form lists a whole bunch of services. Maybe we use through the transaction, maybe we don't. The buyer or seller have the option, they have the opportunity to select or waive the service. So, do we need an appraisal? Well, if they're getting a loan, yeah, it's required, right? If it's a cash buyer, it's optional. So if it's a cash buyer, or even if they're getting a loan, are we going to do the appraisal? They're either going to initial here that they've waived it, or they're going to initial here that they select it. The services that they select, we're then going to go a few steps further and say, okay, who orders it? Am I going to order it? Are you going to order it? And then who are we going to have perform that service? So it's pretty clear what services we're using throughout our time together, who's responsible for ordering it, and who's going to do it. The question that came in specifically a few minutes ago was about the home inspection. So if we try to get our buyers to order a home inspection, and they just, no, I'm going to save money. I don't need a home inspection, We're going to document the conversation that we tried, right? If it went down face to face, we're going to go home and send an email talking about, please consider getting a home inspection because of the following reasons. But then we're also going to have them initial that they waived it. Now, is this going to keep you out of trouble? I'm not the commission. I can't answer that. But it gives you an advantage because it shows your intent. It shows that you tried. So in addition to your communications, we also have this form, and you can see various inspections, radon, wood pest infection. I actually had a buyer once waive the pest inspection. I said, are you sure? It's like $65. And she was like, and there's parts of the crawl spaces that her and I couldn't see. She was like, no, I'm going to call Terminex as soon as I buy, and I'll have them come out. But don't you want to know what they're going to find? No. I said, all right, I need you to initial here that you're waiving it, please. So we had that documentation. Insurance. Survey, we don't talk much about, we don't talk about surveys in this class, but you'll talk about it more in 302. But it kind of gives the buyer a note regarding surveys, basically like one last attempt to get them to order the survey. And basically what all that's saying is that if there's an issue that comes up after closing that affects the title that could have been discovered had they gotten a survey done, title insurance isn't going to cover them. So that's kind of our last ditch effort to convince them. I will share this with you guys. I had a teammate last year that got the letter of inquiry. She had cash buyers. They waived the appraisal. She said, are you sure? And they started asking a lot of questions about value. She said, well, one way to determine value is to have an appraisal done. They said, no, we're going to save some money. We're not going to order the appraisal. She said, all right. She had them initial this. By the way, this conversation all went down via text message. These people closed. They bought the house. After closing, they felt like they paid too much for it. Where did they go first? They filed a complaint against their agent. So she got a letter of inquiry. She was asked to respond. She responded with the communication where she tried to get them to get an appraisal. She sent this form in, and I tell you guys, the next thing she heard from the real estate commission was, "Thank you for your cooperation. This matter has been closed." And the reason she got out of it, the reason nothing happened to her, is because she had this form and her documentation. For those of you that are active, do your firms have this? Do your firms use this? I see head shaking. I tell you, my firm, this is on our required forms list. In other words, I'm not getting paid until this form is complete. It's right up there with agency agreements, disclosure, contracts, etc. And I feel like a lot of firms are starting to head this way. This is our form. So professional services, disclosure and election. I will throw this in the chat for those of you that aren't active and you don't have access to the forms yet. I'll throw this in the chat at the next break so you can grab it and download it and look it over. If your firm is using it, keep using it. So that's our off syllabus. It's a good one. Okay, so working with sellers, we're talking about when we do our disclosure, that first substantial contact. Again, if it doesn't happen, if first substantial contact hasn't happened when we're scheduling the appointment, then it's bound to happen while we're at the appointment. Walk in the front door, sit down, and go ahead and do the disclosure. So now you're free to answer questions, ask questions. They're free to share information. Everybody goes forward now that we're on the same page. When we're working with buyers, or prospective buyers, I should say, when we're working with prospective buyers, once we give the disclosure, like I said, at that time, we need to determine how we're going to proceed. I need to know if you're going to be my client or if you're going to be my customer. We need to know how to proceed, how to move forward. And we've got to do this before I start asking the buyer a lot of questions. I can't show property before the buyer starts volunteering information about why they want to buy. Always be on alert for first substantial contact, you guys. And don't be afraid to say, "I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but I need you to understand. When you're talking to me, it's like talking directly to my client." That's only fair. Can I make anybody do anything? No. I'm still working on it. One day I'm going to figure out how to get everybody to do anything I want. But for right now, no, we can't make anybody to do anything. So we provide this form, we provide the disclosure, we go over it, and we're getting ready to review it in just a second as well. And the consumer looks at you and says, "I'm not signing that." Can I make them sign it? Am I going to force a pen in their hand and say, "Oh, yes, you will"? No, I can't make them. Guys, if they refuse to sign it, that's all we can do. That's all we can do is acknowledge on the disclosure, consumer refused to sign. Maybe you say, "Bill at my open house refused to sign," or "Guy in the blue shirt refused to sign," if you don't know their name. But we need some sort of indication that we tried. And just because they don't sign it, one, doesn't mean that we still don't discuss it with them. Still doesn't mean that we caution them, right, about the fact that I don't know your confidentiality. But even if they refuse to sign it, we can still keep working with them. Our disclosure is not a contract. It doesn't create agency. So if they refuse to sign, we're not done. We can still keep going. And hopefully in time, you have built their trust and they're going to be more apt to sign. Does that make sense? A lot of it with the consumer is building their trust. I showed one of my listings once. The lady called off the sign. I met her at the house. We were still in the driveway. I figured once we got in the front door, she might start sharing something. I already represented the seller. I was the listing agent. And so in the driveway, I did working with real estate agents with her. And she looked at me and she said, "I just met you. I'm not signing anything you give me." Fair enough. I get it. I wrote refuse to sign and I did not hop in my car and leave. I said, "Okie doke, let's go on inside." But I still discussed it with her. I still had the conversation. Once we are hired, Once we're either a listing agent or a selling agent working with the seller or the buyer, how we disclose our status, not necessarily using the agency disclosure. This could be also how we communicate with other agents. If you are already a seller's agent and you are communicating with a prospective buyer or a buyer's agent, then we have a duty to disclose our status no later than first substantial contact. If you've been hired as a buyer's agent, you are already out there running around representing a buyer. When you contact the seller or the listing agent on behalf of your buyer, we have to disclose our status orally at initial contact. So I've already been hired as a buyer's agent, and my buyer says, there's this new listing that came on the market and I want to see it tonight at 6 o'clock. Great, I'll meet you guys out there. And the buyer says, wait a minute, before we go, I have a couple questions. Can you help me get some information? I say, of course. So I call the listing agent. Listing agent answers the phone and I say, my name is Julie Campbell and I'm working with a buyer that's interested in your listing at 123 Main Street. When did I disclose my status of being a buyer's agent? I did it at initial contact. The only thing you knew about me up to that point was that my name was Julie Campbell. So the first time I reached out to that seller, that listing agent, I disclosed my status of being a buyer's agent. I let them know up front. For those of you that aren't active yet, here in the Triad, we have a centralized showing system. So we have one place that we can access. It's called Showing Time. And we can go to this one place and schedule all of our showings. It's a lot of fun. It's really, really convenient. When you go to Showing Time to schedule a showing, you find 123 Main Street, you go in to schedule these showing, you pick your, tonight at 6 o'clock or whatever. And it asks you to identify your role. Are you a buyer's agent or a seller sub-agent? You submit the request, and the seller and the listing agent get an email that say, Julie Campbell, buyer's agent, wants to show your listing today at 6 o'clock. So even though I personally didn't have direct communication with that seller or listing agent, their initial contact of me was when they got the showing request, and Showing Time identified my role. Showing Time allows me to say, I am a buyer's agent or a seller sub-agent. We also need to disclose whether or not we could potentially do dual agency. If the firm offers dual agency, if the firm offers designated dual agency. We discuss that, whatever your firm offers. And again, we just need to have this conversation. Eventually, our authorization needs to be in writing. Remember, if I can't get them this form in their hand right now, how many days do I have to get it to them? I have, that's right, 3. See, I do that and you guys can't see, I need to do that. 3 days. You guys get 3 days. That doesn't stop us from being able to have the conversation. So let's go out to Learn, Test, Pass. And we're going to come up under the Section 1 material. No, we're not. Sorry, we're going to go down here under Forms. And if we click a link to our forms, like I said, any form, we're not going to get through all these in this class, don't worry. But we're going to talk about some. And one of the forms that we have in here is our Working with Real Estate Agent disclosure. There's actually 2 disclosures now. By the way, we just got a major overhaul on this thing July of 2021. So prior to July of last year, this looked totally different. Why did that not open when I told it to? So it looked totally different. We got the overhaul the new view of the form. It's so important that we understand that even though the look of the form may have changed, the law and the rule didn't. So if this is all you've ever known, then you're fine. If you're familiar with the old one, then, you know, chuck it because this is the new look. But the law and the rule never changed. There's two different disclosures, one for the sellers and one for the buyers, depending on the potential consumer, the potential client or customer that you're talking to. It tells us that this form is required for use in all sales transactions, and that does include residential and commercial. Again, we don't have to do this in lease transactions. We only do this in sales. Working with real estate agent disclosure for the seller. It starts with a big box that's identified as important. And the first thing it tells us is that this form is not a contract. We're not entering into any type of relationship. We're not entering into any type of agreement. I am in no way trying to attempt to create agency right here. This is not a contract. Signing this disclosure only means that you've received it. In a real estate transaction, it's important that you understand whether or not an agent represents you. Does that say your agent? That says an agent, meaning the consumer needs to know where they stand with all of us at that first meeting, that first substantial contact. Real estate agents are required to review this form with you at first substantial contact before asking for or receiving your confidential information. Agents are required to give you a copy of the form after you sign it. This form is for your own protection. And then we got this third bullet point that just sums it all up nicely. Do not share any confidential information with an agent or assume that the agent is acting on your behalf until you have entered into a written agency agreement with the agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with others. It's pretty clear, isn't it? I don't owe you confidentiality until you decide to hire me, until we enter into that written agency agreement. Then it says, note to the agent, check all relationship to below that may apply to this seller. And then we have the menu. And I think of this as a menu. This is a menu of the types of agency that the firm offers. This is not saying how we're going to work. This is the options that I have available. It's like when you go to a restaurant and you sit down and you look at the menu, you choose one or two or four things, right? You just don't say, bring me one of everything on the menu. All we're doing is showing you the menu. Doesn't that sound like a lot of fun? We should all go do that one day. But until then, we're only telling you what services we offer. I don't know if I'm going to be a selling agent, dual agent, designated dual agent. I don't know. I'm checking the boxes that my firm offers. Not all firms do dual agency. Not all firms do designated dual agency. This is our job to tell the consumer the products that we offer. Does that make sense? And the agent checks those boxes. The seller doesn't go through and say, I want this, this, and this. This is me telling them the services that my firm offers. Is everybody good on that? This was like the biggest problem topic when they rolled this form out. We didn't know what to do with it. So let's make sure we're good. What questions do I have on that piece of it? If the firm offers a seller's agency, the listing agent, the agent who gave you this form and their firm must enter into a written listing agreement with you before they begin to market your property for sale. If you sign the listing agreement, the firm and its agents will represent you. The buyer would either be represented by an agent affiliated with a different real estate firm or be unrepresented. Then we go in and explain dual agency. That'll occur if your listing firm has a buyer client who wants to purchase your property. If you agree in a written agency agreement, the firm and any agent within the same firm would be permitted to represent you and the buyer in the same transaction. Dual agents' loyalty would be divided between you and the firm, but the firm and its agents must treat you and the buyer fairly and equally and cannot help you gain an advantage over the other party. If the firm offers designated dual agency, if you agree in writing, the firm would represent both you and the buyer, but the firm would designate one agent to represent you and a different agent to represent the buyer. Each designated agent will be loyal only to their client. And then we also have the option, a buyer's agent working with an unrepresented seller, also known as a for sale by owner. The agent who gave you this form will not be representing you and has no loyalty to you. The agent will represent only the buyer. Do not share any confidential information with this agent. Again, I'm not telling you how we're going to work. I'm telling you the products that I have available, what I have to offer. Note to seller, for more information on an agent's duties and services, refer to the Commission's Q&A brochure that we'll look at in just a second, or ask for a copy of it. There's a place, I got a place for 2 sellers to sign. And then the individual agent signs with your license number and firm name. Once they sign it, somehow we got to get a copy to them. And I got to keep one for my records. So some agents take 2 everywhere they go, one for you to sign and one for me to keep, right? You got to sign both, but one for you to have and one for me to keep. Sometimes we can just take a picture of it before we let them walk away with the hard drive. You guys see what I'm saying? But some way or another, they get a copy of the signed version and you have to keep a copy for your records. And how long do we keep a copy of that in our records? How many years? Yep. 3 years. So I think Maria's just going to hold up 3 every time I ask for a number because she's so quick. It's safe to say 3's right the majority of the time, right? There are some exceptions, but 3 is just a really good number to know. So Maria's like 3. You're going to be right most of the time. That's right. Then we also have one when you're working with prospective buyers. We're not going to go, it's very similar. This important piece is exactly the same. But just to show you the different products that we may offer, are we going to be a buyer agency? Or are we exclusively going to represent the buyer? Can we offer dual agency? Can we offer designated dual agency? And with the buyers, we may also have the option to proceed with an unrepresented buyer, making us a seller subagent. The agent who gave you this form may assist you in your purchase, but will not be representing you and has no loyalty to you. The agent will represent the seller. Do not share any confidential information with this agent. If the firm doesn't do seller subagency, then you're not going to check that box. Only whatever your firm offers. Questions? So if we go, let's go out to the Real Estate Commission's website. There's a couple things I want to point out to you while we're here. First off, we're on the homepage, ncrec.gov. And if we scroll down on the homepage, one of the links right on the homepage is license law and rules. This is where you always get what's current. I don't know how old your pre-licensing book is, but there's a very safe chance that something's already out of date. Your post-licensing book, if you have the hard copy in your hand, there's out of date stuff in there. We always need to make sure we can access the current law and rules, and going to the Commission's website. And you'll note when you click on this, it breaks it down. Here's our license law, which is our Chapter 93A, our rules, which is 58. Specifically, if we go into the rules, Chapter 58, and wait patiently while it loads, you can see it gives us the different categories of the commission rule. with even the one that we just mentioned, 58A.0104, which is our agency agreement and disclosure. So when you click on that, then you have access to that rule. So I do think that's important that we know how to access this information, use it as a resource. The other thing I want to point out, one of our tabs, if you guys click on the publications tab and publications, so you go publications twice. Everybody see that? Publications, publications. I'm not repeating myself. Publications, publications. And when you come in or here, there's a whole plethora of information, all sorts of good stuff. And one of my favorite places, one place I go quite frequently, is the Q&A brochures. So when you click on the Q&A brochures, the Real Estate Commission has provided, well, it's for the public, it's helped to educate the public, but why can't we use this stuff when we're helped to the public to understand? Things like these Q&A brochures help put words in your guys' mouth. I know sometimes when we're just getting out there and we're new and we don't know what to say. Back in my administrative days, I used to do new agent training. So I got you guys like right when you got licensed. And hands down, the number one question I always got new agent training was, how do I know what to say? And my answer was, let the forms help you put words in your mouth. We're not going to sit down and read to our consumers. Nobody likes that. But we can use these as tools to help us educate the public, help us have these conversations. Y'all don't need to recreate the wheel. This stuff is already here for you. So there's all these Q&A brochures. Here's one on condos and townhomes, due diligence, earnest money deposit, fair housing, home inspections, all sorts of good stuff in here. And down at the bottom, we have working with real estate. So there's English and Spanish versions of this particular form. You can order the Q&A brochure. What is it, 30 cents each? And it's this nice little glossy, very nice brochure. If you are frugal like me, you can get the free PDF download. So you could include this, you can do either way. But still, it's important that we provide this to our consumers and use this to help you know what to say. Guys, remember, the rule says we provide and review the disclosure with them. So that doesn't mean we're just going to hand it to them and say, here you go. We still have to have a conversation with it. We provide it and we review it. We discuss it. We have the conversation. So this Q&A brochure, it first starts talking about being an agent, what happens when you decide to hire an agent, what is an agency agreement? Can we even see that? There we go. Is there a standard length of time for the agency agreement? And then it gets into Q&A specifically for sellers. So if you're talking to a seller for the first time, you can just focus on this section. I want to sell my property. What do I need to know about working with agents? What are the listing agent's duties? It spells out old car. How is the firm compensated? What's the risk of dual agency? It helps put words in our mouth about dual agency. And then it goes down, and now we break it down to Q&A for buyers. So again, we can kind of tailor our presentation here depending on who we're talking to. Are we talking to a potential seller? Are we talking to a potential buyer? What are the buyer's agents to the duties to the buyer? What services we provide? If we come down a little bit more, it has another section on termination of agency agreements. If I hire an agent, can I terminate my agency agreement before it expires? So it's just a good, handy publication. Again, I have these and I have the disclosure. This is stuff I carry in my trunk. So I'm ready. If I'm not at home, if I'm not at my laptop, I can go old school and provide the paper copy, the paper version. Questions on our disclosure. or our Q&A brochure. Again, publications, when you're on ncrec.gov and you're looking for Q&A brochures. Other good stuff they have in here. I mean, all this is good. Update topics. They have previous CE classes. So if you want to learn more about, I don't know, material facts, you can go to previous CE classes and pull that up. There's another place to access your digital real estate manual, the digital copy. Good stuff. Any thoughts? You guys are quiet. We taking it all in?
Actually, I have a question for this class. Which forms should we kind of be concentrating on?
The ones that we go over. So the highlights are going to be the disclosures that we just looked at in our 3 agency agreements. There's the listing agreement, buyer agency, and our property management. We'll look at some other forms in between as well, like your agency agreement extension. But I think that the stars, as far as the form goes, is going to be our 3 agency agreements.
In regard to the brochures?
Say it again.
What about the brochures? The brochures that we
like
just
the
went
Q&A
over?
brochure. Yeah, I mean, that's just more FYI.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, I would look at the working with real estate agent Q&A because I think that's some good information, very relevant to what we're talking about. Okay. All right. Last little piece in this section, we're going to go off book. So we're going to go based on the syllabus. So you're not going to find what we're getting ready to talk about in your book. And one thing that the Real Estate Commission has done recently is they have taken a strong stance regarding equity issues. As a matter of fact, October's bulletin, did you guys see that the Real Estate Commission hired a new DEI administrator? So they have a department down there, diversity, equity, and inclusion director. So they got a statement on their website. We'll point all that out in just a second. But it's important that you and I have a very basic understanding of these equity issues, particularly because we're the ones working with buyers and sellers who are the ones that face these issues. So we need to make sure that we're advising them in all matters of the transaction. One thing that they address with equity issues is disparate impact. Disparate impact is something that occurs when a policy, on its face, it may seem neutral and non-offensive, but its ending conclusion, its ending result is that of a discriminatory matter. It's something that affects negatively a member of our protected class. So it might not be that was it intent, but the end result is that it does. So if we are alert, if we're aware to some of these issues, then we can absolutely help address them when we're dealing with the public. I think some of those sources that we can find some of this unintentional discrimination might be when we're asking about source of income. If you're a rental situation, if you're a landlord or a property manager, I can ask you to verify your income. However, I need to be very careful that I don't use the source of your income as a basis for you not getting that job. As long as it's a legal source. I mean, if you're a member of the mob or a drug dealer or something, then your money, your cash probably doesn't come from a legal source. People with disabilities, again, I don't know that the intent is to discriminate, but discrimination happens on a regular basis. families with children. Let's say you're a property manager and you have an apartment building that's, I don't know, 20 stories tall. And you have a family with young children that wants to rent an apartment on the 19th floor. I may think it's in those kids' best interest. I may think it's safer for the kids to have them on the first floor or the second floor, but that would be an example. If my policy says no kids on the 19th floor, 19th, 20th floor, that may be an example. It's not up to me to decide what's best for the kids. Remember, you guys, the big picture of fair housing says anybody should have the right to live wherever they want, as long as it's within their financial means. So if the family with 5 young kids wants to live on the 19th floor and they are approved for that apartment, can I deny them of that, even though I think I have their kids' best interest? Absolutely not. Race and national origin are other 2 places where we may see this disparate impact. Again, we're going to touch on fair housing just a little bit when we work with sellers in the next section. So we'll do a review of our protected classes and make sure we have an understanding of that. Implicit basis is a basis or a prejudice that's present, but it's not something that's consciously held. It may not be forefront. Maybe a lot of times this is developed early as early as childhood, and it can come from the way we were raised, nature versus nurture, you know, our parents, our grandparents, our school teachers. So it's various attitudes or stereotypes that we may have developed over the years that has caused us to today have these implicit bases, these biases, these implicit biases. We need to be consciously aware of our thoughts, consciously aware of our actions, make sure that our implicit bias isn't counteracting that, isn't overriding that. Several different ways that we can reduce this implicit bias. It's all about education. We can help educate ourselves, but also help educate those that we work with. I think it's April. Don't hold me to that, but I think it's April is Fair Housing Month. National Association of Realtors has designated, I think it's April, Fair Housing Month. And there's all sorts of good educational opportunities that come out of NAR in that month, whatever month it is. There's good opportunities to learn so we can further understand. You could do an implicit test. So there's several different ones out there. If you go to Google and just put in implicit association test, you'll get various results. Please don't do it now, or, you know, don't take the test now. Do it after class, but implicit association test. And that can help you determine your own personal implicit basis to help make you aware of your biases, help educate yourself, to be knowledgeable about fair housing, having a good understanding about who those protected classes are and what we can do to protect the protected classes. And then any company policies or procedures, anything that can help eliminate those implicit biases. As I mentioned, the National Association of Realtors, they do offer a code of ethics. Once you're a member of NAR, we have to follow their code of ethics. And there's a whole code written about prohibiting from discrimination on the basis of the protected classes. So NAR is a big supporter. About 2 years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago. For those of you that are a member of NAR, you may want to make a note to go check this out. But NAR rolled out something called Fair Haven. And Fair Haven is like an online simulation. You guys remember the books when you were little, the Choose Your Own Adventures? So that's kind of how Fairhaven works. They put you in a fictitious town called Fairhaven, and you are the broker of Fairhaven. And they put you through scenarios of working with different members of the protected class. And they ask you, how would you respond? How would you choose your ending? And if they're not favorable to your response, then they're going to kind of walk back through some training. So again, if you're a member of NAR, check out the Fairhaven simulation. It's really interesting when you go through it. If you're not a member of NAR just yet, then make yourself a note to check it out once you do join your local board and you get into NAR. But I think it's a really good way to create awareness and make sure that we're thinking properly. Probably the big stance that the commission has taken within the last couple of years is that of racial equality. And, you know, I think it's really interesting. I get this straight from the syllabus, but the syllabus and the commission, there's several different ways out there that we can define racial equality. And I think we're going to see some similarities as we start looking at these different definitions. So, for example, the Aspen Institute says a society in which people are no more or less likely to experience society's benefits or burdens because of the color of their skin. You're not getting more, you're not getting less because of the color of your skin. That's how Aspen defines racial equality. The Center for Assessment and Policy Development defines it as the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicated how one fares. So if race wasn't an issue, how would that be perceived? How would that be achieved? And again, we're not, you know, we're just getting ideas here. I'll show you in just a second where you can access this information, what we need to know. City of Durham says racial equality is the condition when racial identity cannot be used to predict individual or group outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. So the condition when racial identity cannot be used. Merriam-Webster says racial equality is equity is a freedom from bias or favoritism. We'll go check out the commission's racial equality sentence or statement, I guess I should say, in just a second. Don't think that the commission is just now getting involved. They have always been involved. They're just making a bigger stance now because we're dealing with the public and the consumers. So this is something that needs to be forefront. So we've always had a commission rule, 58A.1601 about fair housing, conduct by a licensee, which violates the provision of State Fair Housing Act, constitutes improper conduct in violation of this general statute. This is a licensed law. So we've always had a commission rule on fair housing, commanding us to act in consideration with fair housing and state fair housing, not violate any of those fair housing rules. The 58A.0104 on agency agreements and disclosure that we looked at, there's a separate provision that requires us to have a mandatory insertion of any non-discriminatory language in agency agreements. When we look at our agency agreement, starting with the listing agreement tomorrow, we're going to see a statement bold in all caps that says, we, the firm, will not discriminate against any of the protected classes. That's required on any of our agency agreements. If you're using the standard forms provided to us by the North Carolina Association of Realtors, it's already there. If you want to create your own agency agreement, when you're contacting the attorney to help you draft that up, you need to make sure that the non-discrimination clause is included. This is a requirement that we tell the public that we're not going to discriminate in the transaction. There's another piece of the rule, 58A.0120D. This prohibits discriminatory brokerage activities or promotion of a broker. So again, I don't want you guys to think that the commission is new to the racial equality thing. They've just upped their game. And I like seeing the support that they're offering the public, the stance that they're taking. They've built on these rules that have always existed. As brokers, there's absolutely things that we can do. Let's see, what does this mean? Prohibits discriminatory brokerage activities. So you can't promote somebody. You can't favor somebody in your brokerage activities. It's a commission rule. It'd be a violation of a commission rule. We're all equal. We are all equal. And that's what racial equality helps gives us. As brokers, we need to be very, very careful when we're advertising. We need to be very careful that none of our advertising negatively impacts any member of the protected class. I will share with you guys, as of January this year, the Triad MLS launched a new software. And when you're writing your public remarks or your agent-only remarks, this software has flagged a whole bunch of words. And if you're using one of these flagged words in your advertising, you're going to get a warning. And that warning is not saying don't use this word. That warning is saying be careful that you're using this word appropriately. Excuse me. For example, my team works a lot with builders. We do a lot of new construction. And I was putting a listing in for one of our builders. And in the public remarks, we were describing the white kitchen cabinets. And MLS flagged the word white. Now, it didn't tell me I couldn't use it, but it just said, we noticed the word white in your advertising. Make sure you're using it appropriately. Is it appropriate for me to use the word white to describe cabinets? Absolutely. Is it appropriate for me to use the word white when talking about the people? Absolutely not. And that's what this new software from the commission was just warning me. Caution, make sure that the words that you're using, these flagged words that keep coming up, are appropriate, that we're using it appropriately. Where they get these words from is HUD. They have this Part 109 Fair Housing Advertising. Again, you don't need to know that. But HUD and Fair Housing have created words that, if used improperly, could be a violation. Guys, please remember what we just said about your internet advertising. Once you hit submit, it's awfully hard to get back. That's why they have this software flagging us. The other thing I noticed about the MLS, or the other thing the MLS did in January, they removed the verbiage of a master bedroom. We're now referring to it as a primary bedroom or an owner's suite, for example. But MLS has done away with all their verbiage, at least the Triad has done away with all their verbiage of the master bedroom. So making sure that we're properly advertising, that we're not inadvertently putting something in our advertising that could be considered discriminatory. There's something called a housing choice voucher program. Shanquinta, do you deal with Section 8 housing any in your property management? I'm just curious. Section 8 housing? No. So if you do get into property management, Section 8 housing is a HUD program. HUD may offer some assistance for eligible families. Section 8 housing is protected under the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Discrimination, once again, is not involved, not allowed in these incidences. The HUD is going to provide funds for Section 8 housing to make sure that low-income families have affordable housing. HUD cares about being decent, safe, and sanitary. So if you're a property manager and you have a home that qualifies for Section 8, you have some HUD protection, but you also have some HUD guidelines that you have to follow. So when it comes to these equity issues, and to me, you guys, this is the important part. Let's make sure we're good here. What can I do as a broker? You may come across a situation. You could be at a listing appointment and the seller may look at you and say, I'm not going to sell my house to anybody, fill in the blank, any member of the protected class. And we need to have a serious conversation with that seller. That seller needs to understand that we can't discriminate because they have brought an agent into the transaction. They can't discriminate either. When it comes to the offer coming in, the only thing the sellers should care about the buyer is, can they afford to buy the house? The sellers really shouldn't care about any of the physical features, any of the features of the buyer. You guys with me? Unfortunately, there are people out there that will still insist, no, this is not what I'm not going to sell my house, or I am going to sell my house to some member of the protected class. We need to try to help educate those consumers. We need to try to let them know that, y'all, it's 2022. I mean, come on, we're dealing with these things every day. We have the protected classes for a reason. Again, the big picture of fair housing says anybody should have the right to live wherever they want as long as they're in their financial needs. That's not saying that anybody should have the right to live here as long as the seller approves. You guys with me? So we need to help educate that seller. If they insist, if they just insist that they're going to pick the buyer based on anything of the protected class, maybe they want a buyer the same color of skin or the same religion. If they insist on discriminating, our best option as a broker, the best thing we might be able to have to do to protect ourselves is walk away. If they're telling you up front, this is how they're going to act and this is what they're going to do, I don't think it's worth working with them because you're setting yourselves up as well as setting them up. So it might be, if we can't sway them, it might be that we best be by walking away. So that way we don't deal with situations that could get us in trouble. I don't want to work with that seller. I don't know about you guys, but gosh, if this is day one and these are the conversations, it's only going to go downhill from here, right? I don't know. To me, that money's not worth it. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but to me, that commission's not worth it. Put myself in that situation. If we go back out to the commission's website, we go to the home page. And again, everything we just said is in the syllabus. And by the way, I'm going to put all my PowerPoints in Learn Test Pass as well too. So if you guys want access to that. But the home page of the Real Estate Commission, we now have, this is about 1.5 years old, something like that. And here's the commission's commitment to racial equality right on the home page. So it goes on, and I'm just kind of summarize this for you guys, knowing that you have access to it on the home page. You can look at it. Kind of talks about where we are as a country with some of these divisions, some things that we've seen in the news, especially recently, has been troublesome. So it's caused some companies, like, for example, the Real Estate Commission, to stand up and take a stance to try to make it right so that they can make sure doing their part to have this equality for all. We're all involved in a diverse community. We all tend to have the same goal, and we all need to be involved to help the consumer meet this end goal. Again, anybody should have the right to live wherever they want, as long as it's within their financial means. So the commission is standing with those who seek equal justice for all. They're going to do their part to encourage and support the community, try to make necessary changes on their end. They've identified if and where they had any unintentional discriminatory practices, some unintentional implicit biases. They dug deeper into themselves to learn this information. And then they give us some bullet points of things in particular that they were doing. And like I said, just last month, we have a new position down at the Real Estate Commission, the DEI. So it's Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Officer. And I think, yeah, it was just in the October bulletin. I'll show you what I just did in just a second. So we have our new DEI officer, who is this lady right here, Minerva Mims. So if you guys got the bulletin on October 1st, this was all of our first time for meeting her. I'm sure we will be hearing about things from her and how she, as her new role, is going to further help educate the public and make sure that you and I are working with the public properly in these racial inequality issues. If you wondered what I just did, on the home page, you can see here's our license law and rules, and over here is past bulletins. So for some reason you didn't get the October bulletin, you can still have access to it. Here's your licensee log on. So if you haven't accessed your account yet, did you guys know that? You all now have your own log on to the Real Estate Commission's website. If this is brand new information to you, please come in and check this out. Your username is your license number. Your password, I think it's the last 4 digits of your social. Okay, last 4 digits of your social. So that'll initially get you in. All of your contact information can be updated here. You may want to check on your email. Check your spam too. If you haven't gotten the bulletin, check your spam too. Make sure it's not winding up in there, but make sure you have the right email address. And the other thing I want you guys to do with this log on, once you complete a post licensing class or a CE class, after about a week, I want you guys to log on and make sure that it's posted to your account. Lane's got to do her, for us, Lane's got to do her thing to process it, and then she sends it to the commission and they do their thing. There's several different hands that touch it. So every once in a while, it kind of disappears. So give it about a week to post, and then you need to go make sure that you count, that it's counted towards you, so you can get that credit. Questions or comments? Well, let's take our last break. So we'll go 10 minutes. We'll come back at 4:10 and we'll wrap up for the day. So let's take 10. Yes, next Sunday. Last thing we do is take a test. Yep. Well, you guys are coming back. I was gonna throw you that professional services disclosure. Put it in the chat right now for you, just in case you're not a member, you don't have access. And then that way you guys can still get it. It's a good form. I just got to figure out. Again, as you're coming back, right now in the chat, it's loading. So you should almost see, it's close, it's still loading. There it is. You guys see that? There's that sample professional services. If you're affiliated with a firm, you have access to it and you're probably using it. If you're not, you may want to review it and look at it. And that's why I put it in the chat. You guys see that? They got it. If you want it, good, good, good. Just FYI. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I do put my PowerPoints in Learn Test Pass. So I'll put this first little section in just a second so you have access to it. The other thing I want to point out, everything that we just said about the racial equality actually came from a CE class. So there's a little bit in the syllabus, but specifically here in this CE class from 2021, 2022, I guess that was just last year's CE class. So again, you have access to this in Learn Test Pass. You guys aren't going to be tested on this. But I do think it's important that you guys have access to it and you know this information. Anything highlighted in here are things that we talked about in class. So if you want to go back through and look at it, the information is here and available for you. Did you guys hear that?
Where can get it?
It's in Learn Test Pass and it's under the Campbell.
Well, I cannot get access to this format. I don't have any of the forms inside of my website.
When you click like here, the forms.
Okay.
So this is the actual forms. Not all of them we're going through, but some of them we are. But you are in Learn Test Pass. Yes, you were able to get in.
Yes.
And you see this.
No, I don't know why, but this is all I get. And
unfortunately, I can't see that. So what you may want to do, if you go back to your email,
okay.
You got the little tutorial here about how to access this class. I'm willing to bet what you try to do is sign in, but what you want to make sure you do is enroll for free. So that might have been the step that you're missing. So go back through this tutorial.
I get access to all the everything that we had in class, that we have all the material, but I don't get
and everything is here on this link. So if you go through the tutorial, that'll show you how everything you need is on this link, what we're looking at in class. And if you still can't get it once you watch this tutorial and you're having problems, then Jane's available. So just reach out to her and she can make sure you get in. Yeah, but we definitely want to get you in. Her or I can help you. But she's usually our Learn Test Pass go-to person. So I know enough to tell you where to click. If that doesn't resolve, I got to send you to Jane. Let Jane help you out.
I'll try later on. Thank you.
Okay, sure thing. And seriously, you guys, try to get in tonight. If you're not in, promise me you'll get in tonight. Yes? Head nod, acknowledge some point. Okay, all right. Head bob, thumbs up, thank you. Again, there's just good stuff in there. So I think the biggest issue, the biggest problem is that we try to sign in because maybe you have an account from a previous class, but we got to connect you to this class. So in order to connect you to this class, you want to click on enroll for free. And that's what walks you through in the little tutorial here. Okay. So yeah, Campbell folder, we already got some good stuff in here. We talked about our meth houses, our agency material facts, our general update material with our racial equality. We'll look at some of this other stuff as we go as well. Will you guys please set your chat to a private chat? Just send me a private chat. And what I'm getting ready to do is put some Q&As up on the screen. So I'm going to put a Q&A up, and I want you to tell me in a private chat if you think the answer is A, B, C, or D. And that's all you have to tell me in a private chat is A, B, C, or D. The reason I ask for a private chat when I'm asking you questions is twofold. One, I don't want you to be embarrassed. If you don't know the answer, I don't want you to be embarrassed. And two, I don't want you guys piggybacking off of what everybody else says. I know some of us will wait and say, hey, everybody else says the answer C. So, oh yeah, I think the answer C as well. And that doesn't help you. So I want your honest opinion. So everybody have your private chat set just to me, ready to send me a chat. Everybody ready? Okay. Fiduciary refers to, and share with me in a chat, A, B, C, or D. Got everybody. So fiduciary refers to, it's the relationship of trust. Remember, that's how we form, that's how we create our agency duties. So any relationship that we have with the consumer, the client agent relationship is a fiduciary. It's a relationship of trust. The principal should know that they should be able to trust us. That's part of our duties. An agent who breaches the fiduciary duties may be subject to the following except. I want the one false out of the three truths. I hear from, I'm trying to keep up as they come through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So an agent who breaches the fiduciary duties may be subject to all the following except. The National Association of Realtors does not regulate your license. It's the Real Estate Commission that regulates your license. You're a member of the National Association of Realtors. You pay dues. Everybody with me? If you were to have your license suspended or disciplined, or you go on an inactive status, then you're no longer active. Thus, you're no longer active in the National Association of Realtors. If you break your fiduciary duty, you could face disciplinary action by the Real Estate Commission. You can be sued. You could be up for a civil lawsuit or criminal prosecution. And I know these except are kind of tricky, because our brain doesn't always think that way. So don't beat yourself up. Just trying to summarize what we've what we've talked about. Okay, let's try another one. Single agency occurs when a real estate agent think I got everybody. Single agency occurs when an agent, how many parties you represent in the transaction? Just one. So single agent, you're only representing, maybe you only represent sellers, maybe you're with a firm that only represents buyers. Just because you represent both doesn't always mean that you're automatically in dual agency. Let's be very clear about that. You can work with buyers and sellers all day, every day. It doesn't become dual agency until they're interested in the same property. Is everybody good with that? I can work with buyers, I can work with sellers. It's not dual until the seller's selling 123 Main Street and your buyer wants to buy. We'll talk more about designated dual agency and dual agency. We got a section set aside for that. Designated is not automatic. It also has to be created. An agent's duty to the principal includes all of the following except. Here's another one of those except questions. What don't we offer? I think we all get that. Who gets to offer legal advice? The attorney. The attorney. Is anybody an attorney? I'm just asking. I'm curious. You are? Oh my God, I've never had an attorney in a class before. Oh, I got so many questions for you. So you could offer, but I would be careful. I don't know what your rules tell you, but you probably pretty much only wear one hat in a transaction, can't you? Yep. So if you're acting as the attorney, you can't act as the broker. If you're acting as the broker, you can't act as the attorney. Okay. Oh my goodness, Bill, this is so exciting to me. I won't put you on the spot, but I may have some questions for you. So yeah, us as brokers, what do we offer? What's our duties? We offer old car. We cannot offer legal advice. We cannot do it. In North Carolina, the doctrine of caveat emptor. Yeah. Doctrine of caveat emptor is here to stay for sellers, for property owners. You and I do not get to hide under caveat emptor. Is everybody good with that? The seller gets to have caveat emptor. You and I have to follow license law and commission rule. So even though the seller doesn't have to disclose, we do. And the last one for now, principal owes the agent, and then you got some choices here, some Roman numerals. Okay, so let's see. Principal owes the agent. You guys do your head one way or another. Does the principal, interesting point. Does the principal owe us the duty of acting in good faith? Do they owe us the duty? Yeah, they have to do that. They can't hinder me from doing my job, can they? So they hire me, they got to allow me to do my job. So right off the bat, we know the answer is A or C, right? This is how we can kind of interpret these questions. It can't be B and it can't be D. So I just eliminated 2 just by studying that one. What about the principal owing the agent compensation? And somebody brought up the very good point about commission. I would say commission and compensation can be used interchangeably. Let's just say for the purposes of understanding, do they owe us payment? Do they owe us commission? Do they owe us compensation once we do the job? And that answer is absolutely yes. That's how we protect our commission, is with those agency agreements. And I apologize for the wording. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. But they owe us some form of compensation for doing the job. Typically, compensation is in the form of commission. We were hired to do a job, and on completion of doing that job, we should get paid. And I know we'll see that a lot more as we get into these next couple sections and look at our agency agreements. What questions do I have? Was the most part of today a pretty good review for you guys, help you get back in the throw of agency, back in the swing of agency? If you picked up something new along the way, that's a bonus, right? As we get into these next couple sections, we're going to be more specific. So for example, where we're heading next, this will finish us out for today, and we'll pick up wherever we leave off tomorrow. But we're going to spend some time now just working specifically about working with sellers. This section tends to weigh more on residential sellers. We will dabble in commercial a little bit, briefly discuss if there's any differences. But bottom line, you guys, sales is sales. So before we get into this section, let me start with a caution. Let me start with what we're not going to do. I'm not here to teach you guys how to get sellers. I'm not here to teach you how to solicit listings and how to get business. I'll leave that up to your firm and your own devices. What we are going through in this section is the law and the rule that revolves around working with sellers. So we're going to talk about some things that you can't do, some things that you should do, but I'm not going to tell you how to get business and make lots and lots of money. So now that I've given you my disclaimer, let's first talk about working with sellers. And when you meet somebody for the first time that wants to sell their house, just stop, slow down. I know it's exciting, but I need you guys to stop. And one of the first things that we need to do is ask the prospective seller if they already have an agency agreement in place. If they are already working with an agent, we don't need to get involved. We do not need to be involved in somebody else's active listings. Now, we're going to talk about what happens. Sometimes they reach out to you. Sometimes they're not happy with their agent, happy with their services, and they're shopping around. And that may be the case. And we will talk about how we proceed with that. But the bottom line is they are still currently in an active listing agreement, and we need to honor that contract. We need to honor that commitment until they're out of it.
So this has to be in writing, right? What if they're verbally talking to another agent and they kind of had a verbal agreement, but it's still not in writing?
Then they have nothing.
Okay.
So if they have, if you got verbal, you got nothing, right? So, a good way to tell if a seller is already in an agency agreement with the firm, look up the address in MLS. If it's advertised, if it's an active listing in MLS, they already have an agency agreement. But again, if they reach out to you, you're driving down the road, you may not be able to look that up. So that's why we just need to, I'm interested in listing my home. Are you already working with somebody? And we're going to go through something very similar with that with buyers. Because guys, if they say, yes, I'm in an agency agreement, hands off. Okay, we got to let them honor that existing contract, that existing agreement. So some general requirements for our agency contracts. Whenever we're working with the owner of a property, may that be a for sale situation or a property management situation. Whenever we're working with an owner, we always have to have our agency agreements in writing from the very beginning of the relationship. In other words, I cannot perform a single service for an owner without having a written agency agreement. That's a little bit different when we talk about buyers in the next section. But for sellers, I cannot put a for sale sign in your front yard. I can't take pictures, measure, advertise, market, anything until we get that relationship in writing. When we are dealing with our written agency agreements, there's certain musts that all of our written agency agreements have to have. When you guys see the word must, that's called an absolute word. Is there any wiggle room to the word must? No, this is kind of the end all be all, right? So license, law, and commission rules says that our written agency agreements must be signed by the parties. The buyer, or in this case, the seller, signs the agency agreement, and the agent is allowed to sign the agency agreement on behalf of the firm. So let's all remember, agency agreements between client and the firm. As an agent of the firm, I'm allowed to sign that agency agreement on behalf of the firm. When you sign on behalf of the firm, you need to include your 6-digit license number. I think most of us have this memorized. Go ahead, memorize it. If you don't, you need it like everywhere you go. All of our agency agreements have a definite termination date. We cannot put this agency agreement is good for 3 months, for example. We need a definite date. So what's 3 months from now? October, November, December, January 8th, 2023. We've got to put a definite date in there. Our sales agreement, our listing agreement does not allow for an automatic renewal. Our listing agreement says when it's over, it's over. Can we agree to extend it? Sure, absolutely. But we don't have to give each other prior notice. We've already decided it's over on this date. When it's over unless we agree to extend it. When we get into our property management section next weekend, we're going to learn that our property management agreement may allow for an automatic renewal. So we're still going to have a date in there, but maybe we can renew it for 30 days until one of us ends it. Either way, we still have a definite termination date. And then all of our agency agreements are going to have the non-discrimination clause. We mentioned that briefly a few minutes ago. We will actually see that. I think most of the forms that we use are standard forms from the North Carolina Association of Realtors. Is that what you guys are pretty much using? The ones that are provided to us that they kind of show up in .loop and we don't know where they come from, or DocuSign or SkySlope or whatever you use. You guys, please understand, those aren't the only forms we're allowed to use. We can use another agency agreement. We don't have to use a standard form. We can use another offer to purchase and contract. We don't have to use a standard form. We can use another form as long as it was created and generated by an attorney. And we need to make sure that these certain things, if we're doing something different, we need to make sure that these things are in the agency agreement. There are several different ways that firms can agree to work with sellers. And I think the most common, the one that we're all most familiar with is the full brokerage service. And that's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about. But before we get to that, let's talk about a couple other ways, types of listing agreements that we can have. And something gaining in popularity are limited service listing companies. Limited service listings. We're seeing more and more of these types of firms pop up. So it's important that we understand what they mean and what they do. They typically charge, think of like an a la carte. So once again, they're providing a menu and they're telling the seller, I can put your listing in MLS for X amount. I'll do an open house for X amount. They're not going to do a flat fee or a flat percentage. They're going to charge for each service provided. And the consumer can go through the menu and say, I want that, that, and that. And now they know how much their fee is going to be. It's so important that we understand that what they're limiting is their services. these firms still owe their clients old car. They're not limiting their duties, they're just limiting their service. Now, our standard forms don't cover this type of relationship. So limited service firms generally have their own agency agreements drafted by an attorney. The commission cautions us at this point. There are some brokers out there that are referring to these companies as discount brokers, discount firms. Does that kind of have a negative connotation to it? What do you think of with discount services, discount things? It's like in the back of the bin in the store, right? It's been marked down and marked down. Don't refer to these as discount brokers, discount firms. They are limited services because they're still owing old car. They're just limiting the services that they provide. Brokers involved with a limited service listing contract cannot waive their duties. There it is again. We always have a duty to disclose material facts, even if you're working with a limited service contract, a limited service firm. They still have a duty to avoid making false promises. They still have a duty to avoid any undisclosed conflict of interest. Even though they're limited services, they can't enter into undisclosed dual agency. Still need to properly account for the trust funds. Anything we have in our trust account, money we have in our hands. Does this sound familiar? Again, they're the same type of firm that we are. They're just operating a little bit different in the way they offer their product. They're going to act competently. They're going to deliver all offers immediately, but no event later than 3 days. They're going to comply with the Residential Property Disclosure Act. We'll talk about that in this section. They got to comply with the Lead-Based Paint Act. We'll talk about that in this section. Anybody had a transaction yet with a limited service firm?
I used one to actually sell a house one time.
Say it again.
Not as an agent, but as a non-agent.
As a seller, so you hired a limited service. How was your experience?
Oh, it was excellent.
Yeah.
They have a niche. They have a niche for people that don't really want to pay big commissions.
Yep.
And they basically send you the sign and they list your MLS and you get that for a price, or you can say, okay, I want you to be at closing. So that's an extra price, or, they a la carte it. And it probably is really appealing to people who either don't want to pay commissions for any reason other than that. And quite frankly, or economic reasons for people, right?
Yep. Yep. And if you have experience selling a house, maybe you don't need the full service. Maybe you've done this enough that you know what you're doing. I did one of these. I was a buyer's agent. My buyer called me interested in a limited service listing. I never, to this day, I have never had communication with the listing agent. All contact I had was directly with the seller. Now, I had instructions in MLS telling me to communicate directly with the seller. Obviously, that wasn't a service that they paid for. I'm pretty sure the listing agent was off in the background, assisting their seller. And I'm not going to lie, when I first saw all communication directly with the seller, I got a little bit nervous as a buyer's agent. But once I talked to the seller, this guy was an investor. This is what he did for a living. He bought homes and flipped them and sold them. Bill, it wasn't you, was it? I'm just kidding. But he had the experience. He had the knowledge. To this day, it went down as one of the smoothest transactions I've ever had. I don't know if because the agent wasn't involved or not. I'm not sure. But it was a very good experience for both my buyer and I. And when we got to closing, we looked at that closing disclosure. I received what my firm would consider a full commission. So I got all my money. They paid me. And the listing company received $400. And I'm guessing they paid that firm just to put the listing in MLS. I know the seller did the open house, but like Bill said, you can go through and say, I want this, and I want this, and you get those services and you pay for the services that you select. Let's see, you provide listing service after assisting with major deal. I do the lease renewals for the tenants for a flat fee. I don't know if that counts. So you do the limited service after assisting with the deal. So you help them buy it, and then you're still around to assist them to manage it to the landlord. And again, they can kind of pick and choose what they do. So yeah, I would say that's a very, very similar type service. Some sellers are more knowledgeable than others. If you haven't sold a house in the last 10, 15, 20 years, this may not be the best type of firm for you. You may want that full brokerage experience. But yeah, if you do this on a regular basis, if you're a flipper, an investor or something, absolutely an option. Another type of agreement that we have that's not a full brokerage agreement is something called a protection agreement. This is protecting us, and particularly, this is protecting our commission. Let's say you're a buyer's agent and your buyer is interested in a for sale by owner. You contact that for sale by owner, and per your buyer's agency agreement, you ask that FSBO, are you willing to compensate me? Are you willing to pay me? Do your head one way or another. Does the FSBO have to pay you? No, they're unrepresented. They chose to go it alone. And maybe they chose to go it alone because they didn't want to pay us. I don't know. But they don't have to pay your commission. I have a duty to my buyer to ask. So we ask the FSBO and they say yes or no. If they say no, then the buyer has to pay me. If they say yes, then I want to make sure that I have this protection agreement in place. I want to make sure, are you guys going to take somebody at their word when they say, yeah, I'll pay you? No, we got to get it in writing, right? And we got a form for that we'll look at in just a second. This protection agreement is in no way an agency agreement. I'm not attempting to create agency. The for sale by owner has already chosen to go alone. I mean, could they choose to hire me? Sure. Now we got to have the discussion of dual agency. But for the most part, the FSBO has agreed to go it alone anyway. So we're not attempting to create, or we're not using this form to create agency. Regardless of how the seller answers your question of whether or not they're going to pay you or not, regardless of how they answer it, we always need to provide that seller with the working with real estate agent disclosure. That for sale by owner needs to know that I represent the buyer. That FSBO needs to know that the buyer's best interest. That FSBO needs to know that I don't owe them confidentiality. Does that FSBO not have the right to know that? Absolutely. Even if that FSBO is paying me, they need to get that my loyalty is to my buyer. Now, the form that we have that we're going to look at in just a second, gosh, this one's a mouthful. This is the unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement, which is standard form 150. So we'll go out and look at that. Everybody good? Everybody have this? Good? Okay. So again, if we go to Learn, Test, Pass, down here under Forms, you got this link. And all this link is to Jane's Google Drive. And this is the form. Again, we're in no way trying to create agency. The only thing this form is doing is protecting our commission. So the unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement The selling agent represents the buyer. This agreement is entered into on this date by and between the seller and the firm. Seller is the property commonly known as 123 Main Street. Seller is endeavoring to sell the property without the assistance of a licensed agent. However, the firm has a client, name of the client here, who would like to see the property. Does that say buy the property, make an offer on the property? We're using this to get in the front door. They want to see the property. If seller sells the property to the client, seller agrees to pay the firm a fee of X amount. So whatever we agree to, whatever we negotiate, how much wiggle room you may have with your firm about the commission to collect, what the seller may or may not agree to. Here is our non-discrimination clause, again, all bold and all cap. We will look into this when we look at our listing agreement tomorrow, so hang on to that for just now. And then we got to agree to the following. So the fee will be deemed earned if the seller enters into a contract to sell the property at any time within X amount of days from the date the seller signs this agreement. Once earned, the fee will be due and payable at the earlier of the closing or seller's failure to sell the property as a result of the seller's defect of the contract. However, if prior to the expiration of this agreement and the execution of the contract sell the property, seller enters into a valid listing agreement with any firm, seller is no longer obligated to pay us because now they have an obligation to pay the firm that they hired. So if they do decide to hire somebody between now and then. Buyer agency, seller acknowledges that the firm is representing the client, the buyer, with respect to the property. As an agent of the client, the firm has a duty to act on behalf of the client and will not be acting on behalf of the seller. Again, we're explaining our duties to this for sale by owner. This duty requires that all information regarding the transaction given to the firm by the seller be disclosed to the client. It gives us into a couple examples here. Compelled by outside circumstances to sell at a certain date, a lower than offer price, the firm would have to disclose that to the client. Sellers advised to keep this in mind when they're communicating with us. By signing this agreement, seller acknowledges that this client agency relationship has been previously discussed. Kind of a box that stands out. Do not sign this form until you have received and read the Working with Real Estate Agent brochure. So this form helps us in making sure that we remember to get that. Seller and firm each acknowledge receipt of a signed copy of this document. Seller signs, and then the agent signs on behalf of the firm. So this is the protection agreement. Again, we're protecting your commission with an unrepresented seller, assuming they agree to pay you. If they're not going to pay you, I don't need this form. Only if they're agreeing to pay you. Questions on this?
Julie, that would also be the time when you have that conversation with the buyer and say, if you want this house, the owner has agreed they're not going to agree to pay me, that you would need to agree to, you're going to have to pay me based off of our agency agreement, correct?
That's right. That's right. And Bill, I would have that conversation before we cross the threshold, right? I would call them back, be like, hey, I called that FSBO as you asked, and they're not willing to pay me. So if you want to see this house, you got to remember that our agency agreement says that you're going to pay me X amount. That's assuming that your agency agreement is in writing. Remember, our buyer's agency agreement doesn't have to be in writing at first. It can be oral. So if you're working under an oral buyer agency agreement, at that point, what do they owe you? How much do they owe you? Nothing yet. So they don't owe you anything until we get it in writing. We'll talk more about that when we get with the buyers, but absolutely. If the FSBO says, nope, I'm not going to pay you. I had a FSBO once. Man, he was not a pleasant person. I called on behalf of my buyer, had a whole bunch of questions, and I said, are you willing to compensate me? And he actually LOL'd, and he said, no, I'm not going to pay you. I'm not going to pay any agent. I said, great. I appreciate that. I have to ask though. And he's, launched into how we make too much money. And I said, look, maybe you don't think, but my buyers have agreed that I deserve a commission. So one way or another, my commission is going to be figured off the sales price. If you're not going to figure it off of yours, then my buyers have to figure it off. And then this man, I said, what's your asking price? Once we got past all that, I said, what's your asking price? Because in his advertisements for sale by owner, he didn't have a price. So I said, what's your price? And he said, yeah, we're not really going to put a price out there. So how about your buyers come and look at it and then make us an offer and we'll go from there. I said, oh my gosh. And then he said, can I explain some of the features of the home to you? And I said, absolutely. And he launched into this custom built this and custom built that. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever I hear custom built, I hear cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. So everything that was custom built, I never did get a firm. But anyway, I called my buyers back and I said, they're not giving us a price and the house was custom built. And they said, no, we're not interested. So that's as far as I went with that for sale by owner. I wished him well, of course, but he didn't really understand how the game works, did he? You got to give us a price and let us see if it's something we're willing to pay. Just because it's custom built for you doesn't mean it works for the next owner.
The big example of custom built that didn't sell, Michael Jordan house in Chicago.
Say it again. I'm sorry. In Chicago?
Michael Jordan house in Chicago that didn't sell for almost 20 years. It was custom built.
Because it was custom built. Where all the door frames taller and
they dropped the price a lot, but still in the market.
Yeah. It was custom built for Michael Jordan, wasn't it?
Correct, exactly. Yeah. So custom build doesn't mean that it's worth more or it's gonna sell fast or you're gonna get the money.
I'm a lot shorter than Michael Jordan. I mean, I'm like 5'3" in the right shoes, so all those things that he might have needed for height, the stuff I can't reach. How am I going to dust it if I can't reach it? That's what my mind thinks, so absolutely. Just because it's custom built doesn't mean it means anything to the next owner.
Exactly.
Something else when we're working with sellers, we briefly mentioned our multiple listing services, also known as the MLS. Again, this is a voluntary association, local brokers who agree to share their listings. So for those of us that are member of the Triad MLS, as long as the listing comes from the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors, Greensboro, High Point, Asheboro, Lexington, we all are sharing each other's listings. And even though we may not be in Winston, I'm offering my listing, thus my compensation, to an agent in Greensboro that's a member of the Greensboro Board of Realtors. So we've all come together as the Triad MLS. The local board in the MLSs is kind of a subset of the National Association of Realtors. So for those of you that haven't joined a firm yet, once you join your firm, you will join the local Board of Realtors. Membership of the local Board of Realtors includes the North Carolina Association of Realtors, where we get our forms, and it includes the National Association of Realtors. There are member benefits, various things. If you haven't been out to, if you're a member of NAR and you haven't been out there yet to check out the different benefits, anything from technology, if you want to buy a new computer, sometimes they offer deals, discounts. I get my insurance through the NAR's marketplace. So something you may want to, if you're insurance shopping, that maybe it will be a place that you need to look at. But there definitely are member benefits. For us personally, as far as the local level goes, this is where we can share. This helps create an inventory. A salesman needs a product to sell. And if you currently don't have a listing, you don't have anything to sell, right? So the MLS allows us to collaborate and work together and provide each other's listings. And again, it also offers compensation. So back to my previous example, if the listing firm's only offering me 0.5%, I know that that's not going to cut it. I know that that offer of compensation, my firm is not going to find that acceptable. So we'd have to go to the buyer to get the difference. One more thing and then I'm done, I promise. Also within our MLS, as we've said, the listing agent is responsible for accuracy. Make sure you're checking that, having somebody else checking that if you're putting it in or if you're paying somebody to put it in for you. And I also think it's important that we remember that disclaimers do not protect us. So you cannot go in MLS and say, you know, just because you say buyer's agent to verify, I mean, you can put that in there, but just because you put that in there doesn't mean you're off the hook. Everybody good with that? We have a duty to disclose these material facts. We have a duty to disclose things like zoning, for example. So you can't put some made up zoning code in there and put the liability of the buyer or the buyer's agent to verify that. What we're putting in still needs to be accurate. Buyers and buyer's agents should know that they just need to verify. They should just know that that's part of the buying process. So this is where we're going to end for today. I'm at a really good stopping place. So we're going to cut it off here today. So when we come in tomorrow, most of tomorrow, we're going to be working with sellers. So most of tomorrow, we're going to continue this conversation. We get into some other good conversations like measuring, CMAs, fair housing, advertising, various issues that may come up with sellers. We'll also look at our listing agreement tomorrow as well. So that's kind of what we have to look forward to. Do I have any questions or comments or last minute thoughts? Day 1 of 4, you guys are a quarter of the way there, just like that, you know. I'll get our YouTube channel created. I'll get these recordings in. And like I said, tomorrow I'll give you the link. So if you want to go back and review anything, you'll have that. Remember, I'm always around to answer questions. That's why I'm here. I don't think I have anything else to say. So I hope you guys have a great night. Take it easy tonight. Don't party too hard. We got to wake up early on a Sunday morning. So go easy tonight. I'm going to go eat Mexican and drink a margarita tonight. I know I'm going to do that. And then after that, I'll probably knock me out and get me a good night's sleep. So that's my plan. I hope you have similar fun plans tonight, this evening as well. So you guys have a great night. And I will see you guys first thing 9 o'clock tomorrow morning sharp.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.